Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. You're not just learning history, you're living it. We're stepping into a Victorian house circa 1875, and yes, you're the main character. You might think you're prepared. Maybe you've seen a few period dramas. Maybe you've got a romanticised image of candelabras, powdered wigs, and tea served in bone china. But make no mistake, this isn't Downton Abbey. This is survival. You probably won't last the full 24 hours. You'll try, bless your heart. But somewhere between the chamber pot and the arsenic-laced medicine cabinet, you're going to start questioning everything you know about comfort, dignity, and basic hygiene. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure, just vibes. Also, let me know in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? I like imagining us all in our separate cosy corners, unwinding together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on the fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The floorboards creak beneath your feet as you arrive in the front hallway. The scent hits you first, coal dust, beeswax, damp wool, and something faintly metallic. You blink in the dimness. The only light comes from gas lamps hissing faintly on the walls and a flickering fireplace down the hall. The wallpaper is striped, deeply coloured, and strangely sticky in places. Everything feels heavy. The air, the silence, even the furniture looks like it weighs more than your car. You instinctively reach for your phone. It's not there. Of course it isn't. You're wearing clothes you don't remember putting on. Stiff wool, starched linen, and something cinching your middle far tighter than seems ethical. Your boots are buttoned, not zipped. Buttoned. With a tiny hook tool that you have no idea how to use. Good luck if you need to take them off fast. You stumble forward into what must be the drawing room. The fire's burning low, casting warped shadows across a carpet that's seen things. There's a faint ticking, a grandfather clock somewhere in the next room. The time, just after dawn. Victorian dawn, that is, meaning it's practically night indoors. The windows are draped in thick mustard-coloured curtains that block most of the meagre daylight. You try pulling one aside. It snaps back with a dramatic rustle, as if the house is correcting you. In the corner of the room, there's a canary in a tiny cage, looking at you like you're the oddity. It chirps once and goes back to puffing itself up in the cold. Oh yeah, it's cold, very cold. There's a fireplace but no central heating. You can see your breath when you exhale. Somewhere upstairs a bell rings. A long, tinny jingle that makes the canary jump. That bell isn't for you, but now you're aware of the silent network of wires running through the house. Bells, call systems, even dumbwaiters. All mechanical, all eerie, and all slightly too quiet. You get the impression someone's watching, which by the way, they probably are. Victorian homes were designed for surveillance, the kind done by household staff, hidden staircases, peepholes and all. Privacy is a modern concept. In 1875, you are never alone. Now that you're conscious and freezing, it's time to get ready for the day. Spoiler, there's no bathroom, at least not in the modern sense. Just a washstand in your guest room with a pitcher of water, cold obviously, a small ceramic basin, and a rag that looks like it's been used to clean boots, faces, and possibly medical equipment. No mirror, just a small framed portrait of a lady who looks like she wants you to do better. And the toilet? Oh, you sweet summer Chan, there isn't one. Not unless you count the chamber pot under the bed. It's exactly what you think it is. A decorated bowl, often with floral patterns designed for your nightly needs. You stare at it and wonder how humanity ever got this far. You make your way down the narrow staircase. The walls are lined with portraits, serious people in serious poses. Everyone's eyes seem to follow you. One painting is noticeably crooked, and when you fix it, dust explodes into your face. You sneeze into your sleeve. There are no tissues. You're not even sure if handkerchiefs are a thing yet, or if you're just supposed to use your gloves and pretend it didn't happen. As you reach the entry hall, the front door suddenly rattles. Wind, maybe. Or not. You decide not to check. Instead, you press onward into what you assume is the dining room, guided by a faint smell of something. Boiled. The table is long, the chairs are taller than your dignity, and the wallpaper here is floral, but not in a cheerful way, more like a haunted meadow. You glance at the mantel clock. It's stopped at 4:42. Probably 4:42 p.m. 3 years ago. Time has no meaning here. The house lives by its own rules. Historically speaking, this place is probably owned by someone in the rising middle class. Not quite landed gentry, but successful enough to hire staff, maybe a doctor, maybe a merchant, someone who made money off railroads or coal or candles. Victorian Britain was industrial, grimy and wildly inconsistent. You could have an opera house and a cholera outbreak on the same street. Quirky fact. Some houses like this had mechanical contraptions called boot scrapers by the front door, metal grates you used to clean manure off your shoes before stepping inside. The Victorian world was very concerned with the appearance of cleanliness, even if actual hygiene was, let's say, aspirational. And here's something still debated today. How haunted were these houses really? Some historians say the Victorian obsession with ghosts was more psychological than paranormal. Grief mixed with gaslighting, literally. Gas lamps mess with your brain. Others argue that these heavy, drafty homes with their strange acoustics and visual trickery did create genuine eerie experiences that fed into the culture. You're not sure where you fall on the scale, but you do notice that one of the chairs is slightly rocking and nobody's sitting in it. So here you are, just minutes into your Victorian life, and you've already dealt with sensory overload, a ghost-adjacent armchair, and a morning routine that involves zero electricity and 100% trauma. You haven't eaten, you haven't sat down, and already the house is testing your will to live. And this was just your wake-up call. You've barely made it through the opening act, and now the real test begins. You're cold, you're disoriented, and your lower back already hates you. But none of that matters right now, because you're about to face something far more sinister than ghost chairs or shadowy hallways. It's sitting under your bed, waiting, porcelain, innocent-looking, and full of regrets. Yes, it's time to deal with the chamber pot. You tiptoe back up to your room, navigating the thin, treacherously polished wooden staircase. Everything in this house is designed to be elegant and hostile to your balance. The runner rug slips slightly underfoot and you grab the rail, which of course is cold enough to make your knuckles seize. Your breath fogs again. It's officially colder upstairs, somehow. You reach your bedroom and glance around. The fire in the grate has gone out. Naturally. There it is, the pot. Not so much chamber as elegant personal doom bucket. White ceramic, rimmed in blue, a delicate floral pattern just visible beneath the lid. You crouch beside it like it might spring at you. And look, you knew going into this that indoor plumbing wasn't really a thing yet, but nothing prepares you for the psychological toll of making eye contact with your own 19th century toilet solution. So how does it work? You sit, you aim, you hope. There is no seat, no soundproofing, and absolutely no privacy. The walls here are thin, and you're fully aware that your sounds are echoing down into the servants' corridor. Also, there's no toilet paper. Victorians might have used old newspaper, scraps of cloth, or, if they were feeling fancy, fringed toilet lace, which is somehow worse than it sounds. You look around and find nothing but a hard bar of soap the size of a brick and a hand towel that looks like it's been around since the Crimean War. Once you're done, you're expected to cover the pot with its lid and slide it neatly back under the bed, like a terrible little secret. If you're wealthy, or pretending to be, a maid will come in later and empty it without a word. If you're not, well, congratulations. That pot is now part of your daily chores. There's no sink, no real way to wash your hands, just a jug of freezing water and a bar of lye-based soap that strips your skin like it's preparing it for taxidermy. Now, here's a bit of historical trivia to really sink in while you're trying not to cry in your weird, oversized nightshirt. Chamber pots were sometimes used communally. Whole families, especially in working-class homes, would share one pot. That's right. The Victorian version of family bonding was built on shared porcelain trauma. You try to stand, but the floorboards betray you again with a shriek that probably wakes the ghost of whoever died in this house's guest room, which, based on the vibes, was probably someone named Beatrice who loved embroidery and tragically never married. Staggering back to your washstand, you splash a little water into the basin and attempt a morning face wash. It's not refreshing, it's just wet and insulting. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, just a crusty jar of powdered chalk and a frayed natural bristle brush that smells faintly of carbolic soap and disappointment. You try brushing with it, but it's like massaging your teeth with a cactus. Victorians had terrible dental care. Unless you were very rich and very lucky, you probably had several teeth pulled before age 25, and it wasn't done gently. That sharp little reminder of mortality aside, you finish your so-called hygiene routine and head back downstairs, hoping breakfast will provide some redemption. It will not, but we'll get to that next time. For now, let's talk about how everything in this house wants to kill you. See, Victorian homes weren't built with fire safety, air circulation or human comfort in mind. They were about appearances. Those long drapes near the fireplace? Fire hazards. The coal stoves in every room? Literal carbon monoxide dispensers. The gas lamps? Cute until they start leaking and you hallucinate shadowy figures whispering in the hallway. Which coincidentally might have inspired half the ghost stories from the period. And here's your quirky fringe fact of the night. Some chamber pots were built into wooden commodes, disguised to look like furniture. You could be sitting on what you think is a quaint side chair, only to discover mid-conversation that it's actually a portable poop throne. The Victorians loved a multi-purpose death trap. As for modern debates, historians still argue about how widespread chamber pot use actually was in upper-class homes during the later Victorian years. Some believe indoor toilets had become more common by the 1880s, at least in new constructions, while others argue that even fancy homes clung to their pot and pitcher setups out of habit or aesthetic snobbery. So whether your guest room chamber pot is outdated or just aggressively traditional, it's yours now. You finally finish getting ready, which is a generous phrase, because all you've really done is stare into cold water, brush your teeth with sand and use a toilet from a horror movie. You haven't had caffeine, you haven't had food. You're starting to wonder if this house is a museum of human suffering. You glance in the tarnished mirror hanging by the door. Your reflection looks haunted, which honestly is on brand. You take a deep breath and step into the hallway, ready for whatever horror awaits you next. Spoiler. It's breakfast. And it's a war crime. You descend the stairs like someone being led to their execution, which, in a way, you are. The Victorian breakfast table is not the comforting safe haven of pancakes and coffee you've dreamed about. It's a battleground of culinary offences, carefully laid out on linen tablecloths under the accusing gaze of 5 generations worth of ancestors staring at you from the portraits. Your stomach growls. You're hungry, desperate, foolishly hopeful, but the moment you step into the dining room, hope dies a quick, unspectacular death. The first thing you see is a silver dome tray. Ooh, maybe scrambled eggs, you think. Ha! No. Under that dome is a mound of greyish meat that appears to have been boiled until all flavour, and possibly the concept of joy, was removed. It's kidneys, stewed in something vaguely brown, with onions, and a smell that makes your eyes water just a little. Beside it, there's another tray with suet pudding. That's beef fat, made into cake, for breakfast. You're already regretting your life choices, and we haven't even gotten to the porridge, which is so gluey you're not entirely sure if it's food or construction adhesive. You pick up a spoon. It's heavy, like weirdly heavy. The Victorians didn't just casually eat, they committed to their utensils. You take a bite of porridge. It sticks to the roof of your mouth and somehow makes your tongue feel betrayed. The only thing saving you from total despair is the tea. Weak but hot, slightly overbrewed, no sugar, no lemon, and the milk, room temperature and questionably sourced. As you try to swallow your shame with a mouthful of lukewarm tannins, you hear footsteps, quiet, precise, and completely uninterested in your suffering. One of the house's staff, dressed in a starched black uniform with a white apron, enters soundlessly, refills your tea, and vanishes without saying a word. You didn't even hear the door open. Welcome to the invisible workforce. In a proper Victorian home, servants are everywhere and nowhere. There's the cook in the kitchen, the housemaid tending to the fireplaces and chamber pots, the butler orchestrating the entire domestic symphony, and possibly a scullery maid scrubbing pans so old they predate photography. They move through narrow servant staircases, hidden corridors, and sliding doors designed so the family never has to see them unless absolutely necessary. You, however, are not the family. You're a guest, or worse, a distant cousin. So they will see you, they will judge you, and they definitely noticed when you tried to pick up a fork with the wrong hand. That's right. In proper Victorian etiquette, your fork stays in your left hand, your knife in the right. You cut, you lift it, you chew quietly, and you do not, under any circumstances, talk about feelings. A historical fact to chew on between bites of disappointment. Victorian breakfasts weren't small. In upper and middle class homes, breakfast could include multiple meats, fish, baked goods, and eggs, all served in courses. Why? Because life was exhausting and you needed the calories just to survive the corset. Also, there weren't snacks between meals. You either bulked up now or risked fainting in the parlour around 3 p.m. You push the kidneys aside and try a bit of toast. It's passable, except for the thick smear of dripping, basically beef jelly. You mentally apologise to your arteries and move on to something that looks promising. A pastry? No. It's a meat pie, of course it is. And now, the quirky fringe fact of the hour, Victorians were so enthusiastic about breakfast meats that there were even dedicated fish kettles and egg boilers shaped like swans and cherubs. If your kitchen didn't look like a nightmare pottery barn full of vaguely mythological cookware, were you even near yourself even living? Across the table, you notice a newspaper folded just so. You reach for it and realise, too late, that it's yesterday's edition. That's right. Your news is 4 hours old because information travels at the speed of horses and telegrams. You squint at the tiny print. No headlines, just columns. And it's all words. No pictures, no ads for energy drinks or cat memes. Just serious men discussing railway investments, colonial exports and the weather in Bombay. You lean back in your chair. Mistake. The back of the chair is carved wood and presses directly into your spine like it's punishing you for modern posture. You but straighten because that's what's expected. No slouching, no elbows on the table, and for the love of everything, do not butter your entire slice of bread at once. That is common behaviour. Here's where things get properly weird. Somewhere behind the wall you hear a gentle knock, then a bell, then silence. These aren't for you. They're part of the intricate communication system built into the house. Bells wired to rooms, each one corresponding to a different call for service. Dining room, drawing room, library, morning room, boudoir. Because of course this house has a boudoir. But tonight, that bell chime doesn't stop. It rings twice, then once, then 3 times. You don't know the code, but it doesn't sound normal. You glance toward the door. Nothing. The staff doesn't appear. You think about calling out, but you already feel like the house is judging your presence. So you stay quiet and sip your tea, pretending that nothing is wrong. Which brings us to one of the ongoing historical debates. How much agency did Victorian household staff really have? On paper, they were invisible, but in reality they knew everything. The secrets, the scandals, the hidden pregnancies, the financial ruin, the morphine habits. They kept the house running, cleaned up the messes, literal and metaphorical, and were sometimes the only people who knew when something terrible had happened. Like that time in 1870 when a housemaid in Brighton reported a funny smell that turned out to be a decaying gentleman in the guest room. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Back in your chair, you're realising that breakfast isn't just a meal, it's a ritual, a test, and possibly an endurance sport. Every bite reminds you that this era is not built for softness. Even the jam tastes like it has an agenda. You push your plate away gently and dab your mouth with the scratchiest napkin ever made. You are full, but not satisfied. Nourished perhaps, but spiritually wounded. And the day is only just beginning. You make it out of the dining room alive, but barely. A few spoonfuls of beef jelly and a mouthful of sadness now slosh uncomfortably in your stomach as you shuffle back into the hall, unsure of what to do next. There's no TV, no phone, not even a sad little radio to hum in the background. Just you, some drafty wallpaper, and the deeply unsettling realisation that you're expected to freshen up before dressing for the day's real business. That's right, what you're wearing now. That's your pre-outfit outfit. Your soft, shapeless, oatmeal-coloured dressing gown and nightshirt ensemble is only acceptable within a 5-foot radius of your washstand. If anyone catches you still dressed like this after breakfast, you're officially a disgrace. So, upstairs you go. Again, your bedroom now feels like the coldest place on earth. You wouldn't be surprised if polar bears strolled past your window. Laid out neatly across the chair beside the hearth is today's clothing. You didn't put it there. Someone did, silently and efficiently, probably while you were being traumatised by kidney porridge. A corset, some very alarming undergarments, and about 7 layers of wool and cotton stare up at you like they know what's coming. Let's break it down. For a proper Victorian woman, getting dressed is a process. First, the chemise, basically a long undershirt. Then drawers, which are open crotch and more symbolic than practical. Then the corset. Then a petticoat. Then a crinoline or bustle, depending on the fashion of the year. Then a second petticoat. Then the dress itself, bodice and skirt. Then sleeves, then boots, then gloves, then accessories. And you're still not considered properly attired. If you're a man, you're not exactly off the hook. You start with a shirt stiff enough to qualify as armour. Then drawers, braces, aka suspenders, trousers, a waistcoat and a cravat, which you need to tie just right or risk looking slovenly. Don't forget the high collar that slowly soars into your jawline every time you turn your head. Then the coat, the pocket watch, the polished boots, the hat. Bonus points for carrying a cane and looking like you absolutely hate joy. And here's the kicker. You're expected to do this daily, sometimes more than once a day. If your social calendar is cursed enough, there are morning clothes, walking clothes, luncheon outfits, afternoon tea dresses, dinner suits, evening gowns, and morning attire, each with its own set of rules, accessories, and quiet ways to ruin your life. You pick up the corset. It's stiff, whaleboned, and smells faintly of lavender and suffering. You wrap it around your torso and realise there's no way, none, you can lace this on your own. That's because you're not supposed to. Wealthy Victorians didn't dress alone. There was always someone, maid, valet, sibling, whose job it was to pull, tighten, button, tie, and fuss until you could barely breathe but looked fantastic. You try lacing it yourself and immediately regret everything. As you pull the stays tighter, your lungs start filing complaints, your ribs whisper threats, your spine cracks in protest. And your dignity? That left the building around layer 3. You eventually get it tight enough that you can stand upright but not, say, sit down or exhale fully. Historically speaking, corsets didn't actually crush organs or break bones, at least not most of the time, but they did reshape the body over time, especially with early training starting in girlhood. There's still debate among scholars about how harmful they truly were. Some argue corsets were empowering, a way for women to control their silhouette in a society that demanded perfection. Others point out that being unable to bend or breathe without fainting probably isn't great long term. But hey, the silhouette was divine. Now partially dressed and mostly defeated, you reach for the outer garments. The wool dress is heavy, like emotionally heavy. It hangs on you with the full weight of societal expectations. The sleeves are tight, the bodice restricts movement. You can't lift your arms above your head or twist at the waist. Turning to look over your shoulder? Not happening. You are now a walking statue of etiquette and restraint. Here's a quirky little fact to take your mind off the fact that you're slowly overheating under 10 pounds of fabric. Victorian men sometimes used corsets too. Yep, especially among the upper crust. A tailored waist was considered dashing, and a cinched middle under a waistcoat showed discipline and status. So while the ladies were busy training the Sarah rib cages, the gentlemen were over there lacing themselves into quiet body prisons before heading out for tea. You finally managed to lace your boots with those ridiculous button hooks, because yes, even your shoes have a learning curve, and you glance at yourself in the mirror. You look like a bootleg Jane Austen character who's about to collapse dramatically into a fainting couch. But according to Victorian standards, you look fine, presentable, ready to face society. Barely. The real kicker is that none of this is optional. The Victorian world is about appearance. It doesn't matter if you're dying inside. You show up clean, pressed, laced, and emotionally neutral. You nod politely. You eat boiled meat without crying. You say, "How do you do?" even when you don't care how anyone is doing. The layers of clothing are just the outer reflection of how deeply, deeply repressed this entire era was. There's ongoing scholarly debate over just how miserable this daily dress routine really was for the average Victorian. Some argue that the discomfort has been exaggerated by modern storytellers. Others suggest that people genuinely fainted, suffered joint issues, and got heat stroke on the regular. Either way, one thing's certain, the clothing was a full-time job. Back in your room, now fully dressed and dangerously close to passing out, you try sitting down. The corset won't let you. You sort of hover over the chair like a human marionette. Your spine is poker straight, your knees awkwardly angled, and your breath is shallow. And you haven't even left the house yet. You glance at the clock. It's not even 10 in the morning. You're dressed, yes, but at what cost? You teeter down the stairs again, now fully dressed like someone in mourning for their own comfort. Every step feels like a risk. The corset is pulling, your boots are too tight, and your peripheral vision is limited thanks to the severe collar scratching at your neck. There's a table mirror in the hallway that gives you a glimpse of yourself as you pass. You look like you're about to either give someone a scandalous glare or die of a polite cough. You make it to the morning room, or at least that's what you think it is. It's the smallest of the downstairs rooms, with faint yellow wallpaper and furniture that looks like it was designed to correct your posture violently. A stiff settee with fringe that brushes your ankles. Chairs with backs straighter than moral expectations. A table set for tea, already laid out of course, with biscuits that appear to have been baked during Queen Victoria's wedding and preserved by sheer willpower. And yes, it's time for another meal. Not lunch, not yet. This is the mid-morning 11s, or maybe just the let's keep eating so no one talks about emotions snack. But if you think you're going to nibble some toast and scroll your phone, think again. What's waiting for you here isn't refreshment. It's a psychological trial disguised as food. There's a dish with potted meat, cold, dense, greyish brown. Next to it, pickled walnuts. You try a sliver, it tastes like regret marinated in vinegar. There are also scones, but they're dense and bitter and demand an unreasonable amount of clotted cream, which may or may not have been left out for too long. You attempt to sit, and once again the corset rebels. You sort of lean against the edge of the chair like a deeply uncomfortable mannequin. The tea is served again, black, no sugar unless you specifically ask, which you don't, because the maid glides in and out so fast you're scared of offending her ghost. And now comes the next obstacle, conversation. You're joined by 2 other guests, perhaps relatives of your fictional host. You don't know them, they know each other. And in this house, small talk is a blood sport. You open your mouth to say something casual, "Lovely day, isn't it?" and immediately get side-eyed. "Quite overcast," one of them says, dabbing at their mouth with the precision of a surgeon. "We had hopes for sun, but of course the season disagrees." You have just failed. In Victorian society, everything you say must be an observation, a coded compliment, or a veiled opinion wrapped in at least 3 layers of passive aggression. If you say something too forward, you're seen as vulgar. Too reserved and you're a bore. So you nod, make a noise that sounds vaguely neutral, and go back to pretending you're enjoying the biscuit that's currently sucking every ounce of moisture from your mouth. Let's take a moment to consider a historical truth. The Victorians were terrified of saying the wrong thing. Whole books were written on how to have correct conversations, with chapters on appropriate topics, weather, literature, one's recent travels, and forbidden ones, feelings, illnesses, anything French. There were guides to eye contact, timing your laughter, and the subtle placement of your teacup. It wasn't small talk, it was survival. And if you think you can fake it till you make it, here's the fringe twist. They were watching you. People were trained, yes, trained, to spot subtle signs of breeding, education, and status. The way you held your spoon, the way you reacted to someone mentioning the hint colonial approval was expected. Even your posture in the chair could betray you. Slouch even once and someone would write to their cousin about your moral failings before the day was out. You try again. "I noticed a fine rose garden outside," you say cautiously. Polite, neutral, very botanical. "Indeed," the woman says, "though I believe they're rather late blooming this year, likely a consequence of the Irish fogs drifting in." You nod, though you're not entirely sure the Irish fogs are a real thing, or something she just invented to make you feel like an idiot. You smile politely. Your mouth hurts from smiling. The corset is cutting into your ribs. Your tea has gone cold, and you've said a total of 12 words, 10 of which you regret. At this point, you're starting to understand why so many Victorian novels are about people longing quietly in corners. Here's something historians are still picking at. Was this entire social dance as unbearable as it seems? Or was there something satisfying about it? Some argue it was a well-oiled system for keeping order, preserving face and creating predictability in a chaotic world. Others argue that it was a deeply repressive web of self-denial that made everyone vaguely depressed and obsessed with ghosts. There's probably truth in both. And now, just as you think you've survived the worst of the morning, your seat companion drops the conversational bomb of the day. "Did you hear about Mr. Whitby's son? Cholera. Dreadful business. Of course he had just returned from Liverpool. No surprise, really." You freeze. The other guest sighs deeply. "Such a shame. He'd just gotten engaged to a cousin, I believe." "Indeed," the first replies, sipping their tea. "Not close enough to be improper, of course." You stare into your teacup and pretend to be fascinated by the swirls. You have no idea what to say to that. Your 21st century brain wants to scream, "Wait, back up, cousin," but you smile instead, because this is Victorian England, and the only acceptable reaction to death, disease, and marrying your blood relatives is a well-timed sip of lukewarm Earl Grey. And finally the conversation lulls. Everyone sits quietly, listening to the distant ticking of the hall clock and the soft click of the maid's shoes as she disappears down another corridor. Nobody checks their phone, nobody fills the silence. They just sit there. And somehow that might be the most terrifying part. You somehow survive the conversational minefield that is mid-morning tea, though your self-esteem may not. With your posture sore and your emotional energy drained, you finally get the blessed signal that it's time to change rooms. That's right, no one just stays in the same room all day. It's time to transition from the morning room to the parlor, because the house has a room for every emotional phase of the day. Morning contemplation, morning room, afternoon discomfort, parlour, post-dinner dread, drawing room. There's probably a closet for active repression. You follow your hosts, or handlers, really, into the parlour, and it's exactly what you'd expect from a Victorian sitting room. Impossibly ornate, overstuffed and rigid. The wallpaper is flocked in maroon and gold. There are lace doilies on top of other lace doilies. Everywhere you look, there's furniture designed by people who clearly hated comfort. Thin-legged chairs with zero give, ottomans that squeak ominously, and a fainting couch that's probably seen more drama than most theatres. You try to sit again, which is optimistic of you. The chair is shaped like a capital L, qui sait, but the proportions make no sense for the human body. You lower yourself, careful not to wrinkle your skirts or twist your spine the wrong way, and you land with a soft thunk. The seat cushion does not give, it merely tolerates your presence, and now nothing happens. That's right. The parlour is not for activities, it's for being. You're expected to sit quietly, perhaps embroider, maybe read from a socially acceptable novel, or commandeer on a watercolour someone's niece painted in Wales. No TV, no music unless someone's playing it live. The silence is thick, the ticking of the mantel clock is the loudest thing in the room, and the air smells faintly of beeswax, coal smoke and unspoken disappointment. But this is Victorian socialising. You don't do anything, you merely exist together, exchanging occasional sentences like, "The trees are beginning to turn," or "I hear the bishop's wife has taken to embroidery again." These comments are like the background hum of a refrigerator, necessary but barely noticed. Here's a historical truth that won't surprise you. In Victorian society, idleness was a status symbol. If you had time to just sit around and look miserable in a $200 chair, it meant you weren't out there breaking rocks or working in a damp textile mill. Leisure was luxury, and the parlour was proof. But if you think this room is lifeless, think again. There's an undercurrent to everything here. Every glance, every pause, every carefully chosen word is part of the code. Did someone shift in their chair when you mentioned your uncle's trade? Did that lady look slightly too long at your gloves? You might have just committed a social sin. No one will tell you. You'll just find out 2 months from now when you stop getting invited anywhere. And now for your quirky Victorian fact. Some homes had parlour palm plants and treated them like children. These leafy green status symbols were shipped in from the colonies and painstakingly maintained in rooms like this, where they quietly gasped for sunlight between being dusted weekly by someone who would rather be anywhere else. One 1880s guide even referred to parlour palms as conversation starters, which feels like a cruel overestimation of a potted plant's charisma. Across the room you spot a family portrait. Everyone is expressionless, because smiling in photos was practically illegal back then. The father looks stern, the mother tragic, the children, like they've just been told they'll never see the sun again. You get up to look closer and realise it's not a painting, it's an early photograph, hand-coloured with tint and mounted in an ornate frame. The more you look at it, the more it looks like the eyes are following you. That brings us neatly to a debated point among historians. Were Victorian parlours just stylish dens of leisure, or emotional pressure cookers? Some argue they were cosy, familial spaces, where ladies could share news and stitch quietly together. Others suggest they were just guilt-laced rooms of judgment where everyone tried not to betray their inner chaos. Based on how many etiquette books were written on parlour conduct, the latter seems more plausible. A servant enters, wordlessly replenishes the coal in the fireplace and disappears. You notice she never makes eye contact. You also notice she came through a door you hadn't realised was there, flush with the wall, the same floral pattern as the wallpaper. Secret servant passages. This house is one more lever pull away from being a haunted Scooby-Doo maze. Time slows in the parlour. You count your own breaths to pass the minutes. One guest. S begins softly knitting, the needles clicking like distant bones. Another leafs through a book so quietly you can hear the paper shift. You look around for something, anything to do, and finally reach for a nearby needlepoint sampler. It's partially done with the words, "Home is the quietest of joys," stitched in lilac thread. You resist the urge to add and the slowest form of torture. And then comes a new horror. You're asked to play something on the piano. That's right. In this house, having guests means showing off your accomplishments. You're expected to demonstrate musical ability or recite a poem, or perhaps sing in a tasteful soprano while someone else plays Greensleeves. You walk over to the piano and sit, Corset screaming. The keys are slightly out of tune. There's a hymnal open to something cheerless. You plunk out a few notes, hands stiff in your gloves, and manage to cobble together the first few bars of something vaguely hymn-like. Everyone nods approvingly. No one claps. Clapping is for peasants. Here's your fringe fact. Victorians sometimes hosted parlour theatricals, which were short plays performed in the drawing room by guests. Imagine trying to act out a dramatic death scene while wearing 10 pounds of petticoats and knowing the audience is judging your enunciation. Honestly, TikTok dances look dignified in comparison. You finish your little musical offering and return to your chair, sweat trickling gently down your spine under 17 layers of clothing. No one comments, which might be good, or might mean your performance was so emotionally offensive it's being quietly buried under social propriety. At long last, someone stands. "Shall we take the air?" they ask. You could weep, anything to escape this velvet-upholstered purgatory. You seize the invitation to take the air like it's a prison break. You rise from the parlour chair with a quiet grunt, though you quickly turn it into a cough, because no one grunts in Victorian society unless they're dying in a sanitarium, and trail after your hosts toward the front hall. You don't know exactly where you're going, only that it's away from needlepoint and passive-aggressive tea-sipping and that piano that made you briefly consider chewing on the ivory keys out of spite. The front door creaks open with ceremony. The chill hits your face like a sack made of fog. The sky outside is a leaden grey, and the air smells like coal smoke, damp wool, and faintly of horse manure from somewhere down the road. You step out onto the stone stoop, clinging to the railing like you've just emerged from another dimension, and in a way you have. You are now taking a turn about the garden, which is Victorian for slowly walking in a circle and pretending you enjoy it. The gravel path crunches beneath your boots as you move through carefully pruned hedges and flower beds that are fighting a losing battle against October. A few roses cling to life, damp and drooping. Everything else has started to brown and sag, like a guest overstaying their welcome. Your companions chatter quietly, tossing out observations like, "The asters are nearly gone," and "A shame about the chrysanthemums." You nod politely, pretending you know what any of those flowers look like. Really, you're just trying to breathe without snapping your corset in half. Here's the truth. The Victorian love of fresh air came with baggage. The era was obsessed with miasmas, bad air that supposedly caused disease. Before germ theory fully caught on, doctors believed illness drifted through the air like evil perfume, especially in places like sewers, graveyards, and poor neighbourhoods. So taking the air wasn't just about leisure, it was about moral hygiene. Walking outside in a controlled, but elegant environment was a way to prove you were clean, civilised, and definitely not festering with inner corruption. That said, the irony is thick. The air you're walking through right now is a visible, tangible soup of Victorian pollution. Thanks to the Industrial Revolution, every chimney in the neighbourhood is belching coal smoke into the sky. Your nostrils sting, your throat feels tight. Your gloves are already picking up soot, but don't mention it. Talking about air quality isn't proper conversation. Just smile and pretend your lungs aren't staging a protest. You round the corner of the garden path and come across a decorative stone bench. It's damp, of course, but someone has placed a folded wool blanket across it to make it just tolerable. You perch delicately, which is the Victorian term for try not to get tetanus. Across the gravel path is a small hedge maze, adorable on the outside, probably filled with lost cousins on the inside. Let's take a historical pause here. Gardens in Victorian homes weren't just patches of dirt and flowers, they were curated experiences. If you were wealthy, you might have a fernery, a rose arbour, even a conservatory full of imported plants from the colonies. Every leaf, every stone path was a symbol of control over nature. A wild garden, scandalous, messy beds of flowers, a moral failing. If your daffodils bloomed out of season, you could be quietly dropped from social circles. Victorians judged you by your tulips. And then comes the quirky twist. Some homeowners took their garden obsession a step further and created ruins. Oh, as in fake Gothic ruins. They would build crumbling stone archways or craggy towers on purpose just to lend their garden an air of romantic decay, because nothing says refinement like a fake abandoned monastery in your backyard. Back on the path, one of your companions remarks on the lovely breeze. You smile, ignoring the way your ears are starting to go numb. Your hat, pinned within an inch of its life to your hair, catches the wind like a sail. You put a gloved hand on it to keep from being scalped. And here's where things start to get truly Victorian. Out of nowhere, your host stops beside a low stone statue, a cherub with one arm missing, and says, "This is where Father used to sit when he was ill." You nod solemnly, unsure how to respond to that information. The other guest adds, "He liked to watch the sun set behind the yew tree. We kept his pipe out here for months afterward." You stare at the cherub and feel your appetite for dinner shrinking rapidly. This leads us neatly into a recurring historical theme. The Victorians were obsessed with illness. If someone wasn't dying slowly of consumption, they were fainting from nerves, or recovering from a long spell of melancholia. The outdoors was seen as both dangerous and restorative. The idea was to expose yourself to just enough nature to ward off decline, but not so much that you risk catching the vapours. Your companions begin walking again, and you follow, trailing behind like the ghost of a Victorian child who got lost during croquet. The walk is silent now, punctuated only by the soft crunch of gravel and the distant sound of horses clopping down the street. And here's the scholarly debate of the hour. Did Victorians genuinely enjoy these walks, or were they just trying to survive the day without scandal? Some argue that these slow promenades were treasured moments of peace, particularly for women who had so few public freedoms. Others suggest they were just one more ritual, something you had to do, no matter how much your feet hurt or how much soot was turning your gloves grey. As you reach the far corner of the garden, you catch sight of the greenhouse. Inside, condensation fogs the glass, and strange silhouettes of ferns and spider-legged plants press against the panes like botanical prisoners. You want to go in there, to disappear among the plants, shed your corset, and live as a moss-covered cryptid. But someone says, "Shall we go back in?" It's nearly time, and that dream dies immediately. You turn back toward the house and that looming shrine to discomfort, and something flickers in one of the upstairs windows. Just for a moment. A shadow, a reflection. You're not sure, but you do know that someone, or something, was watching. Typical Victorian house. Even the ghosts mind their manners. You re-enter the house like someone returning from battle, stiff, wind-chapped, and slightly concerned about your lungs. Your hat is still precariously clinging to your head, though the wind tried to claim it several times, and your gloves now have a faint soot outline that no amount of discreet dabbing with a handkerchief will erase. Still, your companions look refreshed, pleased even, as if the 15 minutes of inhaling damp industrial air were the highlight of their week. You, on the other hand, feel like you've just been mildly exercised. You're shepherded back into the front hall, where the parlour still looms, untouched and threatening. Thankfully, you aren't forced to return there. No, it's now time for the next phase of your slow descent into Victorian madness. A proper social call. You didn't think it could get worse, but it can. See, socialising in the Victorian era wasn't as simple as stopping by someone's house and saying, "Hey." It was a ritualistic, code-heavy operation with rules so dense they may as well have been written in Latin. And surprise, you're about to participate. Your host, who hasn't smiled once all day, gently informs you that you'll be accompanying her to pay a call on a neighbouring family. You smile politely and immediately start mourning your remaining energy. You're given just enough time to repowder your nose, with lead-based powder, obviously, and refresh your gloves. You consider asking what you're expected to talk about, but something in your host's expression tells you that admitting ignorance would immediately reduce your worth to the level of decorative ashtray. So you just nod and prepare for what is essentially a small-scale diplomatic mission. The carriage arrives, a boxy, rickety thing drawn by a pair of horses that look equally unimpressed by the weather. You climb in awkwardly, skirts bunching, corset jabbing, and try to sit in a way that suggests confidence while also being in mild physical distress. The carriage lurches forward, and you're off, clip-clopping down a soot-stained street, trying to remember how to behave like someone who knows what a calling card is. Here's your reality check. Victorian social visits were judged with military precision. You were expected to leave a calling card with your name engraved in proper script. If your card was accepted, you might be invited in. If not, well, congratulations. You've been socially ghosted. Visits were typically 15 minutes long. Not 13, not 20. 15. Longer, and you risk being seen as overly familiar. Shorter, and you seem disinterested. It was social Goldilocks with more petticoats and much higher stakes. The house you arrive at is, surprise, identical to the one you just left. Possibly built by the same architect with the same grudge against comfort. Heavy stone steps, dark wood door, a knocker shaped like a lion that looks like it's mid-sneeze. The maid lets you in with a nod so slight you question whether it happened at all. You're ushered into another parlour, because of course this one is slightly less oppressive, but only because the wallpaper has birds on it. You stand waiting to be acknowledged. And this is the moment. The most Victorian moment of all. You're in a room with 3 strangers, and every single one of you is now expected to make conversation with the same warmth and spontaneity as a tax audit. You sit, you cross your ankles, you smile, small, closed-lipped, like someone with a secret and a mild toothache. The hostess offers tea, which you accept because it's the only legal beverage in this society. A small dog appears from under a settee. It glares at you. You resist the urge to pet it, because touching someone's dog without being formally introduced might be considered a social misdemeanour. The first topic on the table: weather. Classic. Safe. You nod solemnly as the hostess explains that the rain has made her fuchsias bloom late. Someone adds that the Thames smelled particularly strong last week. Everyone murmurs in agreement. You contribute a half sentence about the garden you walked in earlier, and are met with a pause so tense you immediately assume you said something indecent. Turns out you referenced the north end of the garden, which contains a statue that, according to your host's sudden silence, may or may not be associated with some long-forgotten scandal. Wonderful. You're now the person who brought up the scandalous cherub. Let's pause for a historical fact. Victorian etiquette books, of which there were dozens, dedicated entire chapters to conversation. Topics to avoid: money, illness, religion, strong opinions, the Irish question, any mention of legs, yes, even table legs, and recent deaths, unless spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. Acceptable topics: weather, flowers, pets, briefly, literature, only if it's Austen or Wordsworth. And your travel plans, but not the actual places, just the fact that you are travelling. It's like trying to defuse a bomb with a napkin and an apology. You sip your tea and look around the room for conversational cues. China cabinet holds a collection of figurines. You consider complimenting one but worry it might be tied to a dead child or commemorating a naval disaster. The piano has sheet music open to something ominous in minor key. One guest remarks on her new shawl being imported from France. This earns a slight frown from another. You are now in the middle of a polite argument disguised as fashion discussion. Here's your fringe fact. Some Victorians use floriography, or the language of flowers, to communicate things they couldn't say aloud. Give someone a red rose and you're professing love. A yellow rose? Jealousy. A sprig of basil? Hatred. A single lily? Sympathy. Conversations were literally happening through bouquets. It was essentially the Victorian version of subtweeting but with petals. Back in the room, someone brings up the latest serial in the newspaper, a murder in Whitechapel. The air tightens. You recognise the name. Jack the Ripper hasn't become infamous yet, but the tension says people are watching the news with a little too much enthusiasm. You sip your tea and hope no one asked your opinion on criminal pathology. And now for the debate. Were Victorian social visits actually enjoyable, or just ritualised stress sessions? Historians are split. Some argue they were necessary for maintaining networks, marriages, and reputations in time before LinkedIn and passive-aggressive group texts. Others say the whole system was just performative social anxiety, with rules designed to keep everyone just uncomfortable enough to behave. After precisely 15 minutes, your hostess glances at the clock. That's your cue. You stand, smooth your skirts, say thank you, with all the warmth of a distant cousin at a funeral, and follow your host out. The dog growls softly as you pass. The visit is over. You leave behind your calling card on a silver tray by the door, which will later be judged based on its engraving and paper quality. If it ends up in the fire, you'll never know. You'll just stop being invited. Back in the carriage, your host says nothing. That's either good or very bad. You sit in silence, the wheels clattering over cobblestones, and try not to unlace your corset right there out of pure emotional exhaustion. Congratulations. You've survived your first social call, barely. You return from the social call mentally drained and spiritually bruised, like someone who's been mildly gaslit in a very pretty room. The carriage wheels creak one last time as you step out into the gravel drive, thankful for solid ground and slightly less formal suffocation. Your host doesn't say much, just a vague nod that might mean well done or never speak of that again. It's hard to tell. This is a world where even compliments come disguised as diagnoses. The house looms ahead, that same brooding structure of bricks, soot and secrets. You glance up at the second floor window again, the one that caught your attention earlier during the garden walk, and once again you think you see something move behind the curtain. Just for a split second, then nothing. Maybe it's the lighting, or maybe it's the fact that you're coming undone one social ritual at a time. Inside, the air is heavier, thicker somehow, like the walls absorb the silence and are now exhaling it back at you. You peel off your gloves, carefully, like they're made of antique parchment, and set them on the hall table. Your boots squeak faintly against the polished floorboards, and the only sound is the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, steadily judging you. You're guided toward a hallway you haven't yet been allowed to explore. The wallpaper here is darker, more floral. There's a faint mustiness that suggests this part of the house doesn't get used often. The maid who leads you doesn't speak, but she gestures toward a closed door at the end of the hall. "This was Miss Eleanor's room," she says quietly, almost like she's breaking a rule by saying it at all. You blink. Was. The door is plain white painted wood with an ornate brass handle that feels colder than it should. You hesitate. The maid is already gone, vanished back into the labyrinth of hidden corridors and secondary staircases. You're alone now. Of course. You open the door. It's dim inside, the curtains pulled halfway closed. Dust motes float lazily in the stale air, or drifting through weak streaks of grey light. The room smells like lavender, and something else, something older. Paper, cloth, memory. It's not unpleasant, just paused. The furniture is delicate. There's a vanity with an empty chair. A 4-poster bed with velvet hangings carefully tied back. A small bookshelf filled with unreadable leather spines, and on the nightstand a hairbrush still tangled with strands of dark hair. You step inside like someone entering a museum of grief. Nothing's been touched in a long time, and yet everything looks like it's waiting for someone. The bed is made, a shawl is folded at the foot, there's a half-finished embroidery hoop resting on the windowsill. No dust has settled on it despite the stillness of the room, which either means the maid is very thorough, or someone else has been in here more recently than you're comfortable with. Let's talk about the Victorian habit of sealing off rooms after someone died. It wasn't just about mourning, it was about preserving memory. Freezing time. Families would close bedrooms, leaving everything intact, like the person might walk back in it at any moment. In extreme cases, some even covered the furniture in cloth and locked the door permanently. These spaces became silent shrines to lives cut short, often due to illness, childbirth, or mysterious nervous disorders. You sit carefully on the edge of the bed. It sighs beneath your weight, the fabric faintly rustling. The hairbrush on the table draws your attention again. You pick it up hesitantly. It's smooth, worn from use. The strands of hair still clinging to it are brittle, reddish-brown. You gently set it back down, resisting the urge to mutter an apology. There's a photograph tucked into the corner of the vanity mirror. It's faded, the edges curling, but you can still make out the figure. A young woman in a high-collared dress, unsmiling, her eyes wide and strangely knowing. It must be Eleanor. You meet her gaze for a second too long and look away. The photo hasn't moved, but something about the light in the room has. Now for your fringe fact. Victorians loved photography, especially of the dead. Postmortem photography was a booming business. Families would pose their deceased loved ones in lifelike positions, sitting, lying in bed, even standing with the help of props, and have their portraits taken. It was often the only photograph ever made of that person. Sometimes the eyes were painted onto closed lids. Sometimes the bodies were posed alongside living relatives. Sometimes you couldn't even tell which was which. You glance back at the photograph on the vanity. You wonder, suddenly, if it's one of those. You stand quickly. This leads to a persistent historical debate. Were these rooms sealed off out of love or denial? Some historians argue that preserving a dead loved one's room helped with the mourning process. Others say it hindered it, trapping families in perpetual grief. And still others point out that, for women especially, the room was often the only space they truly owned. Closing it down after death wasn't just respectful, it was the end of a tiny kingdom. You walk to the window, pull the curtain back an inch. The view looks out over the north end of the garden, the one with the statue, the bench where Father sat. The same garden you wandered through earlier, but now from up here the hedges seem wrong, like they've shifted slightly since morning. Nothing major, just enough to unsettle. You blink. The view doesn't change, probably just your brain playing tricks on you. or the corset squeezing your organs into new shapes. You turn back to the room, meaning to leave. But as you pass the vanity, the hairbrush has moved. Just a little. Enough to notice. You step backward into the hall and close the door. You don't run. That wouldn't be proper. But your feet move a little faster than they should. The hallway seems longer now, the wallpaper more faded. You glance back. The door is still shut. Quiet. Innocent. Like it didn't just try to whisper your name in a language you don't remember learning. Welcome to the part of the house no one talks about. You're not even halfway through the day. You walk briskly back toward the heart of the house, trying not to look like you're fleeing from a possibly haunted bedroom. You don't want to draw attention, but your feet have other plans. They clatter too loudly on the wooden floor, echoing through the hallway like the house is announcing your emotional instability to everyone within earshot. You half expect someone to poke their head out from behind a curtain and ask if you've seen Eleanor's hairbrush. No one does. The house stays silent. You finally make it back to familiar territory. The main corridor, the parlour nearby, the entry hall where the fireplace still burns low and sulky. A footman appears out of nowhere, gives you a respectful but empty look and murmurs, "Shall I fetch your walking cloak, miss?" You blink, disoriented. It's time for the midday promenade. Of course it is, because you haven't suffered enough. This is no garden stroll, though. This is the real deal. A full Victorian outdoor excursion into the city proper. Apparently your host has errands to run, and in this century, errands are a team sport. You're expected to come along for the walk through town, as if trudging through thick fog in heels is some kind of leisure activity. You nod weakly, and the footman returns with a cloak that weighs roughly as much as a small horse. Outside, the air is even worse than before. It's not just fog, it's London fog, industrial damp and yellow-tinged, what they used to call a pea super, and what you now recognise as a slow-motion respiratory crime. You clutch the heavy cloak around your neck and step into the murk. The street is a narrow ribbon of cobblestone hemmed in by rows of brick buildings. Smoke curls from chimneys, coal soot rains gently from the sky, and every breath tastes like old pennies. You can barely see 10 feet ahead, but your host strides forward confidently, like she knows the fog personally. You follow, coughing delicately into your glove and wondering how many people in this neighbourhood are actively dying of bronchitis at this very moment. Here's a brutal little fact for you. In 1873, over 2,000 Londoners died in a single week due to fog-related health issues. That's the thing about Victorian fog. It wasn't just mist. It was a thick blend of smoke, chemical pollutants and natural fog that settled into the lungs like damp cement. Breathing it was like French kissing a chimney. As you pass a lamp post, you notice something strange. It's on even in broad daylight. That's because gas lamps didn't just light up the night. They stayed lit all day when the fog got too thick to see anything. You're walking through an eerie twilight at noon. Your boots slick with coal-stained puddles. Horse-drawn carts rumble by, their drivers coughing into scarves. A child skips past with a hoop and stick, wheezing slightly. Charming. A man in a top hat gives you a long look as he passes. Not a creepy one, just that slow, judgmental up and down that tells you your hat is one feather too short, and therefore your entire moral character is suspect. You nod politely. He does not return it. You've been socially demoted by someone who probably hasn't bathed in 3 days. Victorian cities were a mess of contradictions. Industry and filth, elegance and decay. You pass by shop windows lined with cakes that look too beautiful to eat, and alleyways where rats dart between piles of refuse. There's a faint smell of rotting cabbage, which blends with horse dung and chimney soot to create what can only be described as the Victorian fragrance palette. You pass a row of women standing stiffly on a stoop, widows perhaps, in heavy black veils. They look like statues, unmoving, eyes dull. One of them clutches a child who's wrapped in more wool than seems healthy. You don't make eye contact. You've learned that much. Compassion is fine, as long as it's silent and internal. Now for a curious fact, many upper-class Victorians carried scented handkerchiefs on walks. Not just to dab their noses delicately, but to block out the smell of the city. These handkerchiefs were doused in perfumes or even vinegar, which people held to their faces while passing open sewers or butchers. It's the 9th century version of walking past a dumpster fire and pretending you're smelling roses. You reach a small public park, the kind with iron railings, a gravel path, and benches no one ever sits on because they are always wet. Your host points toward a news vendor, who hands her the day's paper with barely a glance. She tucks it into her satchel and continues walking like she's performing in a Jane Austen film directed by Tim Burton. The newspaper, by the way, is mostly ads and serialised novels, with occasional terrifying headlines like, "Woman found in trunk, foul play suspected." You could read the paper and feel both cultured and constantly in danger. You follow her down another street and suddenly find yourself in a more questionable neighbourhood. The buildings are closer together, the soot thicker, and the people more visibly worn. A man leans against a wall, hacking into a rag. A boy runs past you barefoot. A woman, perhaps a laundress, emerges from a side door carrying a basket full of what appears to be other people's clothing. She stares straight ahead, hollow-eyed. There's a growing discomfort in your lungs. You try to take a deep breath, but it's like drinking a cup of wet smoke. Your throat burns, your sinuses ache. You suddenly understand why Victorians were always writing poems about dying slowly. It wasn't romantic, it was just accurate. Here's a point still debated by historians. Did Victorian people know how bad their air actually was? Some sources suggest yes, they knew and simply lacked alternatives. Others argue the prevailing belief in miasmas, bad air causing disease, was a way to frame pollution as unavoidable rather than something that could be changed. Either way, the fog wasn't just a weather event. It was a character in their lives. A heavy, uninvited guest. Finally, your host turns down a cleaner street. Still foggy, but noticeably more polished. Iron railings gleam. A woman walks past with a parasol despite the total absence of sunlight. You realise you're nearing home. Relief blooms in your chest, and immediately gets strangled by your corset. You re-enter the house like someone crawling into bed after a coal mining shift. Your cloak is removed for you, your gloves unbuttoned. You try to smile, your lips are cracked, you can taste the soot, and just when you think you're done, the butler clears his throat. "Your company is expected in the dining room," he says solemnly. "Luncheon is served." You blink slowly. Luncheon. Of course it is. You're still covered in industrial filth, but sure, let's eat. You're escorted, no herded, into the dining room like a soot-covered lamb to the Victorian slaughter. The butler leads the way with solemn grandeur, opening the door as though you're being presented to the Queen herself. In reality, it's just another long, dark-panelled room lit by gloomy daylight and the dim glow of wall sconces. The wallpaper is somehow darker than before, probably green, maybe brown, possibly both, and the fireplace is smouldering in the corner, coughing out occasional puffs of ash like it's trying to compete with the weather outside. The table is set for luncheon, which, despite its dainty-sounding name, is absolutely not a light affair. Multiple forks are involved, at least 3 knives, napkins folded into shapes that look vaguely accusatory. And yes, another place card with your name on it, as if you haven't already spent most of the day being reminded you don't belong here. You pull out your chair and lower yourself down, trying not to collapse entirely. Your corset, of course, has other ideas. It tightens. You wheeze. You sit like royalty, with perfect posture and a facial expression that suggests you've never felt joy. Let's be clear, this is not brunch. This is not grab a sandwich and get on with your life. This is luncheon, the midday meal of the semi-affluent. A formal affair for those who had enough money to employ people and enough free time to emotionally unravel between courses. The food is delivered on silver trays, covered with domed lids that always make you nervous because you never know what's going to be under there. You've already been burned by kidneys once today. The first course arrives. Cold meats, slices of jellied tongue, ham carved so thin it trembles when you breathe near it, and a pie of some ambiguous origin. You poke at it cautiously, trying to remember the face you're supposed to make when confronted with organ meat. The correct reaction is polite indifference, absolute neutrality. You eat like you're auditioning to be forgotten. And then there's the salad. If you thought it would be a moment of freshness and light, you thought wrong. It's lettuce, yes, but wilted and swimming in a mysterious dressing that smells like pickled despair. There are also anchovies, because nothing says refreshing lunchtime side dish like salted fish glaring up at you from under soggy greens. Historically speaking, this kind of lunch was meant to signal moderation, a lighter break in the day for those who would have a true feast later. But to your corseted body it's still a trial. Every swallow presses upward. Every bite makes your lungs file a formal complaint. You begin to master the art of eating tiny, reluctant portions, like you're being fed under contract. Your host speaks very little, aside from the occasional murmured comment about the weather, the lateness of the post or the quality of the butter, you nod along, trying not to offend the butter. The other guest at the table, some cousin of a cousin, you think mentions that they recently dined with the Darrowtons, and that the roast pheasant was quite passable, though the sauce lacked conviction. You nod again, as though you too have strong opinions about sauces and their motivational struggles. And here's your weird little fringe fact. Victorians loved aspic. That's meat in gelatin. A lot of their luncheon foods were either suspended in jelly or moulded into shapes. There were entire cookbooks dedicated to turning beef, chicken, or fish into shimmering towers of terror. It was considered elegant, and completely inedible by modern standards. You glance down at the quivering, translucent side dish on your plate, and suddenly lose your appetite all over again. You sip the lemonade, tart, warm, and served in a glass so delicate it might dissolve in your fingers. It's better than the wine which tastes like regret filtered through a grapevine. You catch your reflection in the silver serving dome and don't recognise yourself. You look like a Victorian ghost in the early stages of haunting. Pale, stiff, internally screaming. A dish of something called collared beef arrives next. You don't ask what it is, you just eat it slowly and try to detach your soul from the experience. It's chewy, heavily salted, and tastes vaguely of shoe leather soaked in Worcestershire sauce. Across the table, someone sneezes into a lace handkerchief, which they then fold neatly and return to their pocket. You blink slowly and suppress the urge to launch yourself out the nearest window. Now let's talk about the medicine cabinet that most Victorians called a pantry. Because this is the era when food and medicine were often the same thing, and not in a good way. Got a headache? Try a few drops of laudanum, a blend of alcohol and opium. Feeling low? Sip on some cocaine-laced wine. It'll perk you right up. There's even a chance that some of the condiments on the table right now are laced with arsenic, because Victorians put arsenic in everything from beauty cream to rat poison, and sometimes they forgot which was which. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about just how aware people were of these dangers. Some argue that Victorian families honestly didn't know how harmful these substances were, treating them like benign household cures. Others suggest they had some idea, but relied on them anyway out of sheer desperation, or boredom. Either way, the idea of someone casually sipping opium tea while picking at their aspic is both horrifying and very on brand for this era. As the meal drags on, you start counting the seconds between courses. You've lost all sense of time. You're not even sure what day it is anymore. The table is a black hole of decorum and boiled things. You begin fantasizing about a sandwich, a real one, with fresh bread, and no surprises, something you can hold with your hands without being judged by 7 generations of ghostly ancestors in oil portraits. The final course arrives, stewed fruit with clotted cream. It's purple, vaguely lumpy, and looks like it came from a plant with a personal vendetta. You eat a few polite bites. The cream has a texture that can only be described as sinister. You fold your napkin, as instructed, into a perfect triangle and place it on your plate. Done. A footman pulls back your chair and you rise slowly, afraid to bend at the waist lest you disturb the delicate balance of misery and digestion. Your host says, "A pleasant luncheon, I think." You smile, mouth dry. "Indeed." You're not sure whether to thank her or apologise. You step back into the hallway, light-headed and mildly poisoned. The air out here is marginally better than what you just consumed. You exhale slowly, feel the corset squeeze your kidneys, and wonder, honestly wonder, if this is how people used to die of lunch. And then from somewhere upstairs you hear a bell ring. Not a normal one. A sharp, urgent, unfriendly bell no one else seems to notice, because of course they don't. You pause mid-hallway, ears straining, still half paralysed by clotted cream and the memory of jellied meat as that unfamiliar bell sound echoes again, 3 short rings, crisp and fast, like a telegram made out of tension. It's not the delicate jingle used to summon tea. This one is sharper, colder, more mechanical, like the house itself is trying to warn you. But no one reacts. Your host glides past you with the same detached serenity of someone who's never been surprised a day in her life. She murmurs something about retiring to the drawing room, leaving you standing there like a tourist in a horror film. You turn your head slowly towards the staircase, where the sound seemed to come from. The shadows on the landing seem thicker than they were before lunch, and you're now 65% sure this house is trying to communicate something, and 35% sure you're just hallucinating from bad aspic. But you can't go chasing bell sounds, not without breaking some unspoken Victorian law about wandering unescorted. So instead, You do the only thing you're socially allowed to do right now: sit quietly and wait to be included in something more formal. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, you're invited into the morning room. Sorry, drawing room. You're losing track. They're basically the same thing. A long, narrow chamber where furniture goes to look good and die. The drapes are heavy, the wallpaper is paisley in that please stop looking at me sort of way, and everything smells vaguely like rosewater and a bad memory. You're seated again, as always. The chairs have no give. The sofa tilts slightly to one side, like it's seen things. The table in front of you is set for an activity, which terrifies you because that can mean almost anything in this house. It's a letter-writing station. Piles of thick paper, ornate pens and ink pots, some already leaking around the edges, wait patiently. The lady of the house clears her throat and says, "I find it comforting in times such as these to write." She doesn't clarify what kind of times these are. You nod anyway, because nodding is your full-time job now. You sit down and take a sheet of paper. It's heavier than most modern novels. You select a pen, quill-shaped, naturally, and begin to write. You don't know who you're writing to, maybe yourself. Maybe the version of you that still believed this was going to be a charming little step back in time. Either way, you begin with "My Dearest," because that's the only safe opener. Now here's a fun, mildly alarming historical fact. Victorians were obsessed with their letter writing. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a necessity. The average upper-class person might write a dozen letters a week. Some wrote daily. There were postal deliveries multiple times a day in large cities, meaning you could send a letter in the morning and receive a reply by dinner. It was the original group chat, but with more ink stains and existential dread. The room is quiet except for the soft scratching of pen on paper, and the occasional sigh that sounds like it's carrying 100 years of repressed emotions. Across from you, a guest writes furiously, eyes narrowed, like she's composing a duel challenge. You wonder briefly what kind of drama is being passed between these dusty corridors in calligraphic passive aggression. And now the quirky fringe detail. Some Victorians sent mourning letters written on black-edged paper to signal recent death in the family. The darker the border, the more recent or more tragic the loss. Imagine getting a letter with a 3-inch black edge and knowing before you opened it something terrible had happened. Letter writing was a language all its own. From the ink you used to the way you folded the envelope, everything spoke volumes. Letters were emotional landmines. You set down your pen and look at your work. It's legible. Barely. The ink is still wet, and you now have a streak of it on your glove, which is Victorian for scandal. You discreetly place the letter under a blotter and pretend not to notice. Your host speaks again. "Eleanor used to write constantly," she says, her voice thin as lace. "She had a correspondence with a young man in Hampshire. After she died, we found over 40 letters unsent." The air leaves your lungs a little. You don't ask who the young man was, or why the letters were never mailed, or why, for the love of all things linen, the room you were in earlier hadn't been cleared out if the girl who once occupied it had been dead for years. These are not questions you're allowed to ask. Instead, you murmur something vaguely sympathetic because that's what this house runs on. Tactful silence and quiet, incurable sorrow. And here comes the scholarly debate of the day. Was Victorian mourning culture about respect or control or troll? The black clothes, the rigid timeframes, a year and a day for a spouse, 6 months for a parent, the memorial stationery, even mourning jewellery made with human hair, it was all incredibly specific. Some say it allowed people to process loss in a dignified way. Others argue it weaponized grief, turning it into a performance and policing the emotional lives of especially women. Either way, you're now writing letters to people who may not exist, in a room that feels like the set of a very tasteful séance. You glance out the window. The fog is still there, thicker now, and for a moment you see a shape move between the hedges, a figure maybe, or a trick of the light. You blink. It's gone. The bell rings again. One short, one long, still urgent, still ignored by everyone around you. You're beginning to realise the house has its own language, and you don't speak it. The letter-writing session winds down. Someone rings a small handbell. Tea is served again. Of course it is. You take your cup with a shaking hand, the china rattling softly on the saucer. No one comments. The butler enters the room and announces, "The photographer has arrived." Everyone stands. Your stomach drops. This can only mean one thing. You freeze with your teacup halfway to your lips, heart doing a slow, confused thump. The photographer has arrived? That shouldn't feel ominous, but in this house, everything does. The sentence lands like a warning, like you've just been told the doctor will see you now, and also the doctor only works with leeches. The others begin to move with a sort of reverent purpose, smoothing skirts and tightening cuffs. You follow along, mostly because no one tells you otherwise, and apparently that's how decisions work now. The house seems to darken as you pass through the corridor, or maybe it's just the hour. The soft to light of mid-afternoon filtered through dirty glass and heavy drapes. The fog outside clings to the windows, blurring the view like it's trying to spare you from seeing what's coming next. You're led into a room you haven't been in before. This one is colder, less furnished, less personal. It smells faintly of mildew and lamp oil. The photographer is already there, setting up equipment that looks more like battlefield artillery than anything involving art. He wears a dark jacket, wire-rimmed spectacles, and a distracted frown. He does not greet anyone, only mutters to himself while adjusting the wooden tripod. You glance around. The furniture has been rearranged for the occasion. A large wingback chair sits near the window, angled slightly. There's a faint mark in the carpet where something heavy once sat, but has now been moved, likely just before you entered. It gives the unsettling sense that you've just missed something important. Or someone. Your host gestures for you to sit. You'll be part of the family group, she says, like you've been pre-approved by some unseen committee. We do this every year on the anniversary. You don't ask what anniversary. You sit. The photographer steps forward and begins arranging people like furniture. A tall cousin stands behind you, one gloved hand resting lightly on the chair's edge. Someone else sits beside you stiffly, their perfume smelling of lavender and iron. You sit absolutely still, unsure where to put your hands, unsure if you're supposed to smile. No one else is smiling. Everyone's expressions hover somewhere between respectful solemnity and deep existential fatigue. The photographer vanishes under a black cloth and mutters something unintelligible. The air is heavy, the silence heavier. You hold your breath as the shutter opens with a faint click and a metallic groan, the light catching for one long agonizing moment before the exposure ends. You're allowed to blink again. Everyone breathes out just a little. And then the second chair is brought in. You hadn't noticed it before, it had been against the wall, just another piece of background. But now it's moved directly beside you. There's a moment where something passes through the room, a hesitation, a tension, as the photographer clears his throat and says, "Now the memorial arrangement." You stiffen. Someone touches your shoulder lightly, a reassurance or a warning, you can't tell. A framed photograph is placed on the seat of the empty chair. It's Eleanor, the same picture you saw upstairs, only now it's printed larger and mounted on a wooden frame. Her eyes, still distant, still watching, still unsmiling. Everyone takes their places again. The mood shifts. No one speaks, no one breathes too loudly. The photograph sits like a presence, a placeholder, the missing piece of this otherwise still tableau. Let's pause for a deeply unsettling historical fact. Victorian mourning portraits were real, common, and sometimes intentionally included the dead. If a family member died before a portrait could be taken, the family might still pose with a likeness. Sometimes a photo, sometimes a painting, occasionally the deceased themselves, propped and styled to look alive. This was seen as respectful, a tribute, a visual way to grieve. It was also, depending on your perspective, deeply haunting. You stare straight ahead, doing everything in your power not to look at the photograph. But your eyes keep drifting toward it, toward Eleanor. And here's the worst part. You're pretty sure the photo's different this time. The tilt of her head, the slight angle of her mouth. It's not the exact same image you saw upstairs. Or maybe it is, and the shadows are playing tricks. Or maybe you're just losing your grip on what's normal in a house where time folds in on itself like so many layers of mourning crepe. You sit through another photograph. This one takes longer. You're not sure how many seconds pass, but they stretch, bend, loop. The photographer finally mutters, "Done," and everyone begins to move, again. Except you, and you feel rooted, cold, like your bones absorbed the stillness and forgot how to be part of the world again. The framed photo is removed. Carefully, like something sacred. It's taken out of the room, along with the second chair. No one says anything. No one acknowledges it. You're beginning to realise the house doesn't just mourn Eleanor, it hosts her. You stand slowly, your legs tingle from being still too long. As you make your way out of the room, you glance back, just for a second. The chair that held the photograph is still there, but it's not empty. You shake your head. Look again. Empty. You keep walking. And here's the scholarly debate that keeps people in tweed jackets up at night. Did Victorians romanticise death because they had to, or because they wanted to? Some argue that frequent loss, childhood illness, childbirth, cholera, forced people to build elaborate rituals around grief as a survival mechanism. Others suggest there was something indulgent about it. A love of tragedy, a cultural fascination with suffering that turned mourning into an identity. Either way, you now fully understand how someone could fall into a spiral of black dresses, solemn portraits, and eternal tea breaks with people who aren't entirely alive anymore. You're ushered into another room after the photograph, a smaller sitting room. Someone hands you more tea. You'd accept it automatically, even though your hands are shaking. You sip. It's cold, of course. Your host says, "It's good to remember her this way. She always loved the camera." You nod, not trusting your mouth to form words. Outside, the fog presses harder against the windows, flattening the light. You realise it's now late afternoon. The longest day of your life is still not over. And for the first time, you're not sure you'll see the end of it. You sit there for a long moment, lukewarm tea clutched between your gloved hands like it's the last warm object left in a world designed to chill your soul. The sitting room is dim, quiet, just the tick of a mantel clock and the occasional soft clink of porcelain as someone daintily replaces their teacup on its saucer. Across the room, your host is talking to the cousin about Eleanor. Again, always Eleanor. She says the name like it's both a sigh and a warning, as if invoking it too casually might summon a breeze through closed windows or the soft click of a lock turning in an empty room. You're still recovering from the family photo séance when the maid enters. She gives you a tiny curtsy and places a tray of finger sandwiches on the table, which you pretend to consider but do not dare touch. The bread has that pale, crustless look of something boiled rather than baked, and you're not emotionally prepared to find out what Victorians thought went well between slices of bread. Last time it was sardines and mashed peas. You're still processing that betrayal. Instead, you brace yourself, because it's afternoon tea time. Again, yes, another round. And this one isn't casual. This is the social gauntlet known as taking tea. Capital TT, the real event. Not the early 11s or that limp biscuit you were handed in the parlour earlier. No, this is formal, orchestrated, and absolutely full of trapdoors. Figurative ones. Probably. The table is reset, lace cloth and all, with scones and jam and tiny pots of cream whose textures are probably somewhere between chalk and cloud. Plates are lined up like little soldiers. Cups gleam in the low light. You already know you're going to fail this test, but there's no polite way out. You smile, you thank the maid, you fold your hands like someone who isn't plotting their own escape. Your host begins pouring. No one speaks during the first round of service. Tea is serious business. The order of operations is sacred. Cup first, then sugar, then milk, unless you're committing to the old school style, in which case milk goes first. But don't do that. That's for infants and social exiles. You hesitate. Everyone sees. You go with milk after years, sir, and hope that redeems you in the eyes of whichever ancestor portrait is staring most aggressively from the wall. You take your first sip. It's strong, bitter, slightly oversteeped. There is no lemon. You would never ask for lemon unless you were trying to burn this house down with scandal. You add half a spoon of sugar and drink again. Marginally better. Not enjoyable, but tolerable, like every part of this day. Now comes the conversation. Oh yes, afternoon tea isn't just about drinking. It's about surviving a minefield of social expectations. You're expected to contribute. You're expected to be witty, but not too witty. Charming, but not flirtatious. Thoughtful, but not so insightful that you disrupt the gentle illusion of quiet ignorance everyone's worked so hard to maintain. The cousin starts by mentioning her latest charitable endeavour, visiting the convalescent home down the lane to deliver knitted socks to retired clergymen. You nod, resisting the urge to make a joke. You offer a gentle, "That's very generous of you," which is the verbal equivalent of placing a blank envelope on the table and hoping no one opens it. Next comes a discussion about local gossip. The vicar's niece has taken up watercolours, someone says, which sounds innocent until you realise the tone is laced with judgment. Apparently watercolour is acceptable only if it's flowers or countryside, not figures, which she's been dabbling in. The horror. A woman drawing people. You nod again, pretending to have an opinion on artistic boundaries. Now for your historical dose of discomfort. Afternoon tea was a tactical event in upper-class Victorian life, especially for women. It was the one time of day you could socialise without a chaperone, strategise marriages, reinforce alliances, and quietly ruin someone's reputation, all under the guise of clotted cream and polite laughter. It was like a 19th century game of chess, but every piece was made of china and every move risked social annihilation. The fringe fact you didn't ask for but now can't unknow? Some women were so nervous about tea etiquette that they practiced in private, alone or with hired tutors. There were even pamphlets, how to host, how to pour, how to smile without showing your teeth. It was a minefield, and you're now deep in it. The maid reappears with fresh scones, but these have raisins in them. You're not sure if that's an upgrade or a punishment. You try to eat one without getting crumbs on the tablecloth. You fail. The crumbs fall. You instinctively reach to brush them off your lap, and your host gives you the smallest glance. Not a glare, not a frown, just a quick flick of the eyes that says, "I saw that, and so did God." Then comes the moment you've been dreading. Someone asks you a direct question. "Do you care for Byron?" You blink. "The poet," you say, like a fool. Pause. "Yes," says your host, though his temperament, well, one wonders. It's a trap. You can feel it. If you say you enjoy Byron, you risk appearing turbulent. If you dismiss him, you insult at least 3 women in the room who still sleep with a copy of Childe Harold under their pillow. You take a long sip of tea, then say, "His work is atmospheric." That word seems to appease them. You live to sip another day, and now for the scholarly debate. Was Victorian tea culture empowering or oppressive? Some historians argue it was one of the few social rituals where women controlled the narrative, hosting, guiding conversation, managing impressions. Others argue it was just another layer of domestic surveillance, where women policed one another with teaspoons and disapproving glances. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But at this exact moment, with a lukewarm scone in one hand and your reputation on a saucer in the other, you're leaning toward oppressive. The conversation drifts to safer territory. Local illnesses, weather patterns, the price of coal. You nod at all the right times. Your back aches from sitting so straight. Your corset has fused to your spine, but no one has accused you of being scandalous, uncultured, or tragically American, so you count the entire event as a win. Afternoon tea winds down, not with a bang, but with a slow fade. The guests begin to excuse themselves one by one. Your host places a hand lightly on your shoulder. "We shall rest now," she says. "Dinner is quite late." You're free, for now, but as you stand, the weight of it all hits you again. You still have hours to go, and you haven't even cried in the coal scuttle yet. You're told it's time to freshen up, which in Victorian terms means you're being given 30 minutes to lie down in full formal wear, try not to wrinkle anything, and pray for a second wind before dinner. A meal that apparently requires both physical endurance and spiritual resilience. A maid leads you back upstairs, not down the usual hallway, but into a different wing of the house entirely, one you hadn't yet seen. The floors are quieter here, the wallpaper a touch more faded, and the air has that still, slightly sour scent of steam, damp linen, an antique despair. You're ushered into a small bedroom with a lopsided bed and a cracked window pane that lets in a subtle whistle of wind and fog. The maid gives a quick curtsy, mumbles something about hot water arriving soon, and disappears through the wall. Or maybe a cleverly disguised servant door. You're not even surprised anymore. You sit on the bed, and it lets out a groan so human you instinctively say sorry. The mattress is stuffed with horsehair or broken promises. You're not sure, but the dip in the middle suggests someone, or something, sleeps here often. You're told it's laundry day, which, based on what you've seen of Victorian domestic life, means someone is currently engaged in physical battle with bedsheets in a basement cauldron of boiling suds and emotional trauma. Let's pause here and talk about what laundry day actually means in this era. It's not a gentle whirl through a smart machine while you scroll on your phone. No. It is a day-long ordeal, involving wood-fired coppers, huge metal pots, boiling water fetched by the bucketful, and enough lye soap to burn off your fingerprints. Every Monday, the scullery maid or washerwoman starts at dawn and doesn't finish until late in the evening, by which point they've wrestled, beaten, boiled, rinsed, wrung out, and hung up every soiled scrap of linen and underclothing in the house. You lie back gently on the bed, not because it's comfortable, but because you can't physically hold yourself upright anymore. Your corset is now part of your skeletal system. You can hear someone down the hallway scrubbing furiously, maybe floors, maybe soles. And somewhere beyond that, the low, wet slap of a sheet hitting stone. Victorian homes had an obsession with cleanliness. Not hygiene, mind you. Cleanliness. The kind you could see and smell, white linens, lavender water, crisp collars. Never mind that people bathed infrequently and regularly slept in beds full of coal dust and hair oil. As long as your pillowcases looked fresh and your tablecloths weren't stained, you were socially sanitary. Your quirky fringe fact for this moment. Victorian laundresses used blue dye called bluing to make whites appear whiter. It was a powder or liquid made from ultramarine pigment or indigo, added to rinse water to counteract yellowing. It didn't clean anything, it just created the illusion of purity, which is frankly the perfect summary of the entire Victorian lifestyle. There's a small pitcher and basin in the corner of your room. The water is lukewarm at best. You splash some on your face and dab with a towel that smells faintly of starch and exhaustion. There's no soap, you assume that's intentional. They've already decided how clean you're allowed to be. Through the cracked window you can hear a distant bell ringing from a nearby church. Or maybe it's just the echo of the house communicating again, letting everyone know that time is passing and death is winning. You glance at the wardrobe. It's shut, its doors slightly warped from decades of moisture. The key is missing. You're not about to open it anyway. Victorian wardrobes are famously the gateways to other dimensions, typically ones involving unpleasant relatives, unfinished embroidery and damp nightgowns. You notice a small pile of folded linen on the chair in the corner. Pillowcases, monogrammed napkins, and something that looks suspiciously like a christening gown. No context, just there, sitting silently like it wants to be remembered. Now for a historical debate that historians can't quite agree on. How often did Victorian people actually change their clothes? Some argue that the upper classes changed multiple times a day. Morning dress, walking dress, dinner gown, evening attire. Others suggest that due to the impracticality and physical labour required to dress, most people simply rotated outer garments while keeping the same underlayers for much longer than we'd like to imagine. Underwear was laundered weekly. Maybe, if you were lucky, and if the laundry staff hadn't collapsed. A soft knock at your door pulls you out of your spiral. It's the maid again. This time she's wheeling in a basket full of linens, clean ones you assume, though they look suspiciously identical to the ones from earlier. She curtsies again, mumbles, "Pardon, miss," and begins folding the fabric on the small table by the window. You watch her work for a minute. Her hands are red and raw, knuckles chapped, fingernails nearly worn away. You don't say anything, because this is one of those moments where you realise you're not the main character in this house. She is, or would be, if stories were told from the perspective of the women who kept everything from collapsing while no one remembered their names. She leaves without a word. You exhale. The afternoon light is starting to die. The fog has thickened again, painting the window a pale grey. The temperature drops with it. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, corset or no corset. Your fingers are stiff. Your breath fogs the glass when you lean forward. You think about asking someone what time dinner is, then decide against it, because there's no point asking a question when the house will just tell you. And it does, right on cue. A deep, low, distant bell rings from somewhere deep in the walls, not the urgent clang you heard earlier. This one is deliberate, rhythmic, heavy with meaning. It's not an invitation, it's a summons. You rise, slowly. Because the floor is cold, because your bones ache, because the linen sheets on the bed might not actually be clean. And the christening gown in the corner seems to be looking at you. You step into the hallway. Dinner awaits. God help you. You descend the stairs slowly, one hand trailing along the banister that's been worn smooth by decades of anxious fingertips. The light has shifted again, lower, murkier. The hallway lamps just beginning to flicker to life with that soft hiss of gas ignition, casting elongated shadows that stretch toward you like lazy fingers. Somewhere behind you a clock chimes 6 times, each note hollow and oddly damp, like it's being wrung underwater. You are now entering the sacred chamber of Victorian performance art, the formal dinner. You thought lunch was serious? You thought afternoon tea was pressure? No. Dinner is the final boss of the social gauntlet. It's the moment where appearances peak, and failure of posture, manners, conversational tone, wine etiquette, or the angle at which you butter your roll could exile you to the margins of society where people wear last year's dresses and marry beneath their station. The dining room has been transformed. The heavy drapes are drawn tight. The gas sconces are turned up just enough to make everything gleam without looking joyful. The long mahogany table has been fully weaponized. White linen so crisp you could paper cut yourself on it. Silverware arranged with mathematical precision. Crystal glasses that seem too fragile for this earth. There are flowers in the centre, white and pale violet, and a centrepiece that appears to involve taxidermy. You don't ask. Your host is already seated at the head of the table, straight-backed and still as a portrait. The others arrive in a slow procession, dressed now in evening wear, darker, sleeker, more sombre. You glance down at your own attire, which to your credit has survived the afternoon with only a few wrinkles and a mysterious stain near the hem that you don't remember acquiring. It's fine, everything's fine, no one looks happy. That means you're doing it right. The butler pulls out your chair for you. You sit with the delicacy of someone trying not to break glass with their skeleton. Your corset, already your least favourite possession, feels tighter now, like it's decided to actively collaborate with the food to end your life. The first course arrives. Clear soup, served in shallow bowls, steaming faintly, with suspicious floating fragments that may or may not be vegetables. You sip. It tastes like someone whispered the word beef into a vat of hot water and then apologised. But it's polite to eat it, so you do, slowly, letting it coat your soul with quiet despair. Here's your reality check. Formal Victorian dinners could have up to 12 courses, and you were expected to sit, smile, and consume every single one like it was a delightful experience. Even when it was eel in aspic or boiled cow tongue or some pudding with an uncomfortably gelatinous personality. The more courses, the wealthier the host. The longer the dinner, the more committed everyone was to pretending they weren't exhausted and slightly dying. After soup comes fish, soft, pale, delicately steamed, drowning in a white sauce that tastes like salty milk and dread. You cut it carefully using the special fish knife provided. Heaven help you if you pick up the wrong fork and take small bites, trying not to think about the fact that this is course 2 of many. Conversation begins in low melodic tones. No sudden laughter, no strong opinions, just floating observations about the state of the roads, a cousin's engagement, a vague mention of political unpleasantness abroad, and of course the weather. Always the weather. You nod at the right moments, interject once with a safe comment about the coolness of the season, and are rewarded with a vague smile from your neighbour, a gentleman who smells faintly of pipe tobacco and moral superiority. And now for your historical fact. Victorian table etiquette was a war zone of unspoken rules. Napkins on your lap, not tucked into your collar. Hands above the table, but never elbows. Eat with your mouth closed, but don't chew silently for too long, that's suspicious. Don't talk too much, but don't be too quiet. Don't reach, don't point, don't cut your bread. And whatever you do, never ever butter more than one bite at a time. To do so would be like declaring open war on civility. You've barely survived the fish when the next course arrives. Removes. That's Victorian for meat. A selection of lamb, beef, and something gamey that you can't quite identify, all arranged on silver platters by servants who float like ghosts. You choose the lamb. It's pink in the middle, the fat still clinging defiantly to the edges, and served alongside vegetables that have been boiled to death and then boiled some more out of spite. You chew carefully. The lamb tastes fine, but you can feel your body beginning to revolt. It knows what's coming, because no Victorian dinner stops here. After meat comes game, roasted pheasant, quail or rabbit, often served cold and always with the faintest taste of feathers. Your neighbour accepts a slice of pheasant and offers a solemn, "Cook's done well," which in this context is the highest form of praise a servant can receive short of being named in a will. Here's your quirky fringe detail. Some Victorian households served peacock for special occasions, reassembled with its feathers afterward for dramatic effect. Nothing says we have too much money like a meat centrepiece that stares at you while you eat its cousin. Conversation shifts again. Now it's poetry. Byron comes up. So does Tennyson. Someone quotes The Lady of Shalott, and everyone nods as though they didn't just internally zone out for 8 lines. You try to look impressed. You also try not to let your eyes wander to the portrait above the fireplace, which seems to get slightly more judgmental every time you sneak a glance. Now for the sweet course. Finally, you think. Dessert, mercy, but of course not. This is a trap. The sweets are all boiled puddings, blancmange, or something called syllabub, which tastes like creamer that's been stressed out for 3 days. There's also fruit, but it's decorative. You eat a small spoonful of something vaguely lemony and think about simpler times. Times with chocolate. Times with refrigeration. And here's the debate that keeps dinner historians up at night. Was the excessive formality of Victorian meals about wealth or oppression? Some say it was purely status-driven. More courses meant more clout. Others believe it was a social control mechanism, keeping people too exhausted to rebel against anything. A 12-course dinner will silence any revolutionary spirit. Try staging an uprising after 2 servings of goose and a 4th cup of custard. The final course, nuts and port, signals the end. The ladies rise first. That's tradition. You follow, legs numb, stomach full of colonial import goods and quiet fear. The gentlemen remain for cigars and brandy and whispered talk about empire. You're led into a smaller sitting room with low chairs and lower expectations. Someone starts a game of whist. You decline, pretending fatigue. Which is true. You are fatigued. In your bones, in your soul. The fire crackles faintly. A maid offers you more tea. You don't answer. You're still chewing the pheasant. You wake up somehow without having fallen asleep. That's the best way to describe the state you're in as you sit. Slumped at an angle only slightly more dignified than a collapsing bridge in the soft chair nearest the drawing room hearth. The remnants of the dinner hour still swirl around you. Faint smells of overcooked meat, the sweet but cloying aftertaste of port, the lingering sense that you've just committed a dozen small etiquette crimes without ever realizing it. Someone nearby is humming. Not music, just a sort of tonal exhale, the sound of someone whose soul has been sufficiently flattened by the 5th course of a blancmange-based trauma. You reach for the tea that was offered earlier and discover it's cold. Of course, time has passed, though you're not sure how much. Minutes, hours, entire geological epochs. The drawing room is quiet now, the kind of quiet that feels engineered. Even the fireplace crackles politely, like it doesn't want to interrupt. And then someone suggests you write a letter. Again, you blink slowly, trying to remember if you ever stopped writing the first one. Apparently, Victorian society is built on a mountain of stationery. Everyone communicates by paper, delivered by hand or by post, folded just so, sealed with wax or left open depending on the intimacy of the message. You're offered a fresh stack of note cards. Your fingers resist, having not fully recovered from their last round of calligraphic labour. But you oblige, because saying no is still not an option. You scribble something vaguely coherent, your name, the date, a lie about the weather, and then carefully blot the ink as instructed. And now it's time for letters to be posted. Not by you, of course. That would be far too personal. A footman gathers them, places them on a silver tray and delivers them to the front hall, where they will be handed off to a messenger who will walk through actual fog for miles to deliver your 2-sentence reflection on yesterday's garden walk. Efficiency wasn't the point. Ritual was, which brings us neatly to your historical reality check. The Victorian postal system was terrifyingly efficient. In major cities like London, there were up to 12 deliveries per day. A person could send a note in the morning asking a friend to tea and receive a reply before lunch. It was like having email, if email came with cholera and was delivered by a boy in a cap who hadn't eaten in 2 days. The conversation shifts again. Someone brings up a recent letter they received from a cousin on the continent. You're supposed to ask which part of the continent, but you're too tired. It doesn't matter anyway. It's a setup for a story about a woman who took a holiday in Switzerland, caught a chill, and returned with a limp and a deeper appreciation for Protestant simplicity. You nod, as if you too have had life-altering experiences involving alpine weather and moral clarity. Then comes the box. It's passed from guest to guest, a small carved wooden box filled with visiting cards. Dozens of them. Names embossed in gold, some edged in black, some folded at the corner. Each fold, each ink flourish, carries meaning. A folded top left corner might indicate a return visit. A folded bottom edge might suggest congratulations. No fold at all? You're not worth the paper it's printed on, you're handed the box. And now for your quirky fringe fact. Victorians didn't just collect calling cards, they used them to play a kind of social Tetris. Women tracked their visitors in card album. Some people had cards for different seasons. Seasonal personality cards. Your card might say Miss Jane Fairfax in spring, and Miss Fairfax companion to Lady Witherington in full. There were even printed etiquette guides for which corner to bend, depending on the occasion. Mourning, congratulations, departure, courtship, apologies. It was like having 5 different LinkedIn profiles and using them all badly. You place your card carefully in the box and pass it on. No one comments, but someone glances at it for half a second longer than necessary. You instantly regret every typographical choice you've never made. And now, like clockwork, the subject of the evening turns to death. Not in a dramatic, weeping into a hanky kind of way. No, in that calm, conversational tone only Victorian society could master. It begins with someone mentioning a cousin's recent passing, peaceful of course in her own bed with the daffodils in bloom. From there, it snowballs into an exchange of obituary comparisons. Who had the best epitaph? Who was buried with whom? Whether the new cemetery on the hill has room for family expansion. Let's hit pause for your historical dose of the macabre. Victorians loved talking about death. It wasn't just a passing interest, it was a cultural hobby. People wore mourning jewellery containing locks of hair. Children's photo albums included postmortem portraits. Some families even held mock funerals for pet birds. Death was domestic, constant, and a little performative. There's scholarly debate about why. Some argue that high mortality rates forced people to normalise death, even romanticise it. Others say it became a marker of class. How one died and how one was mourned said more about status than life ever could. And others still suggest that the entire era was emotionally constipated and used death as a socially acceptable outlet for sentiment. Hard to say, but based on the fact that half the artwork in this room is of pale women holding lilies, you're leaning toward the latter. Someone across the room sighs and says, "Of course, Eleanor adored the old churchyard." You tense. The name again. Always her. Always that faint thread in the room, tugged just enough to remind you that this house has a heartbeat all its own, and it beats for someone long gone. Someone else nods. She said she liked the quiet. That's the thing about Victorian death. It wasn't just mourned, it was curated. You didn't just die, you departed. With taste, with ceremony, with specific flowers and tailored grief. Mourning periods were legally coded in fashion. First mourning, second mourning, half mourning. Your accessories reflected your trauma in real time. The fire sputters. A draught seeps through the window. The room darkens and no one moves to light another lamp. Eventually the game of whist peters out. The tea tray is removed. You hear the butler outside the door, his voice muffled, saying something about preparing the rooms for evening. The guests begin to scatter, dissolving into the hallways like smoke. You're not sure where to go. You're not sure who you are anymore. But you do know one thing. There's a letter somewhere in this house that was never posted, and it has your name on it. You find yourself back in the upstairs hallway, standing in front of your bedroom door, though you don't remember how you got there. One moment you are sitting in a room full of politely grieving people, watching someone fold a napkin with near religious focus. The next, you're alone in a corridor that feels a few inches too long, like the house has stretched slightly while you weren't looking. The gaslight flickers as you reach for the door handle. It's cold, colder than before. You step inside and close the door behind you. Slowly, carefully, as if you might disturb something with your presence. The room looks exactly the same. Or it would, if you hadn't been through enough today to now notice the little things. The way the curtain no longer fully covers the window, the soft, damp spot beneath the chair in the corner, the faint scent of lavender that now smells less like comfort and more like someone desperately trying to mask rot. You sit on the edge of the bed, corset still digging in, skin itchy from wool and starch, feet humming with the collective scream of 12 hours in buttoned boots. You loosen your collar with shaking fingers, but you don't fully undress. It doesn't feel safe, not because of ghosts, though at this point you wouldn't rule them out, but because being vulnerable in this house is the fastest way to become part of the wallpaper. You notice it, finally, in the corner. A narrow door you'd somehow missed before, not a full-sized one. It's barely 5 feet tall with peeling white paint and a rusted knob. It's not the wardrobe. That's on the other side of the room. This is something else. A servant's cupboard, maybe? Or a linen closet? You stare at it, unmoving. Something tells you it wasn't meant for you. Which, of course, makes it all the more impossible to ignore. You rise. Every board beneath your feet groans in protest as you cross the room. You reach for the knob. It's warm. That's wrong. You pause, listen. The house is breathing again, not loudly, just enough. A floorboard shifts somewhere above you. A pipe groans like it's remembering something. You twist the knob. The door opens with a sigh. Inside, it's pitch black. You find a candle on the mantel, light it from the fireplace, and lean into the opening. The candlelight flickers off uneven walls, revealing a narrow, steep stairwell. It disappears upward into the shadows like a throat. The air coming down smells. Not bad, not death, just old, dry wood, dust, the powdery scent of long-forgotten fabric. You know you shouldn't go up there. You also know you're going to. This house is no longer just strange, it's incomplete, and you're starting to feel like the only way out is through. You step inside, ducking under the low arch. The candle trembles, the stair groans. You climb slowly, cautiously, one hand on the wall to steady yourself. There's no railing, just rough plaster and the occasional exposed beam. The higher you go, the colder it gets. Somewhere between the 5th and 7th stair, you become aware of the sound, soft, rhythmic, like dripping water or distant breathing, but you don't stop. At the top you find another door. It's unmarked, plain, slightly ajar. You push it open. It's a bathroom, or something trying very hard to be one. A narrow room with black and white tile that's cracked in every corner. A copper tub, tarnished green, squats beneath the slanted ceiling like it's sulking. A sink, porcelain and stained. And in the far corner, mounted against the wall like some unholy shrine, the toilet. You almost cry with joy. A real, actual toilet. Or at least something that resembles one. It's a high tank model, with a wooden seat, a dangling chain, and a faint air of malevolence. You approach slowly, as though it might lunge at you. The tank groans softly. You glance up and see the waterline faint through the stained glass. It's full. You've found the house's unholy plumbing situation. Let's talk about it. Victorian indoor plumbing was a revolution, and a disaster. Some houses, like this one, had retrofitted water closets with gravity-fed tanks mounted high above the seat. They were loud, moody, and prone to flooding. Others still relied on chamber pots or outhouses, depending on wealth and location. But no matter the setup, early plumbing systems often connected to private cesspools or shared sewers, many of which were prone to backing up, overflowing, or straight-up exploding. Yes, that happened. Your quirky fringe fact for the night. In 1858, during the infamous Great Stink in London, the Thames became so foul with human waste that Parliament was nearly shut down. Lawmakers fled the city, curtains were soaked in vinegar, and the smell was reportedly so bad it could knock a person unconscious. The event finally forced a massive overhaul of London's sewer system, but smaller towns and homes like this one? Not so lucky. You lift the chain on the toilet experimentally. The flush is violent. A mechanical clunk, a roar, then a gurgle that sounds more animal than hydraulic. The pipes tremble in the walls. You hear it travelling, downward, maybe sideways, possibly into another dimension. It doesn't stop right away. The gurgle echoes for a full 10 seconds, then silence. You back away. You can't shake the feeling that something else just woke up. There's a small mirror above the sink, fogged from edge. You wipe it clean with your glove. Your reflection stares back at you, pale, smudged with soot, eyes ringed with exhaustion and fear. But there's something else. Just behind your shoulder, you spin. Nothing, just the tub. You exhale and leave the room. Descending the stairwell is worse than going up. The candle gutters in your hand. You hear something creak below. Not a floorboard. Not a door. Something lighter. More deliberate. Like footsteps. You step back into your room and close the small door behind you. Latches with a soft click. You wedge a chair under the knob just in case. The gaslight flickers again, the floor creaks, and the toilet upstairs flushes on its own. You lie awake for a long time after that. Still dressed, still laced, still very much in someone else's life. You're curled on top of the coverlet, blanket draped over your legs like a shroud, arms pinned neatly to your sides. Because you have officially reached the part of the Victorian experience where even sleep is not restful, it's just another performance. You stare up at the ceiling, where the shadows of the gaslight dance like they're reenacting a tragedy for a very small audience. You would laugh, but laughter feels like the kind of thing this house wouldn't tolerate. You get the impression it would make a note about it and discuss you after dinner. Eventually, you force yourself to stand. The fire in your grate has long since dwindled into a heap of cooling ash, and the room is now icier than before. The gas lamp hisses faintly, casting just enough glow to make the shadows deeper. You shuffle to the hearth, wrap the shawl tighter around your shoulders, and wonder if Victorian people ever actually got warm. It seems unlikely. Between the drafty stone walls, the minimal insulation, and the general dampness of the air, comfort appears to have been a secondary concern, well behind etiquette, empire and decorative brass. You drift toward the hallway again because sleep isn't coming, and the toilet upstairs flushed on its own, which you've decided is either a plumbing issue or a message. Either way, you're taking it seriously. The corridor is dim, the wallpaper darker than you remember, as if it too has given up trying to cheer anyone. You walk slowly, trying not to make noise. The wood beneath your feet seems more vocal now, creaking with a language of its own. Long, aching groans that sound less like footsteps and more like memories resurfacing. You pass the guest rooms, all shut, their keyholes watching you as you go. The air is stale here, thick with the kind of silence that doesn't welcome you. You pause outside what you assume is a linen closet, then keep walking until you find yourself back near the front hall. The sconces here are dimmer, flickering. There's no one about, no butler, no maid, no distant sound of someone clearing dishes or whispering about the dead. And that's when you hear it. The bell. Not the urgent one from earlier, not the cold mechanical clanging that rattled through the walls. No, this one is softer, lower. A dull ding-ding like it's coming from inside the walls behind the staircase. Then again, then 3 more times, then silence. You step toward the source, a narrow alcove near the staircase, half hidden by a faded tapestry depicting what appears to be a shepherd and an unusually resentful sheep. Behind the tapestry, you find the bellboard. It's mounted on the wall, a panel lined with a dozen small iron bells, each with a trembling needle above it. The labels beneath them are handwritten in faded ink. Morning room, drawing room, study, blue guest, nursery, servants' quarters. Most of the needles are still, one is twitching. Eleanor's room. You don't breathe. The bell above it is still swaying. You lean closer. There's dust on the panel, cobwebs in the corners. This board hasn't been used in years, not properly, and yet something or someone is trying to summon someone else. You step back instinctively, knocking your shoulder into a frame painting on the opposite wall. It tilts but doesn't fall. The bell stops. Now for your unsettling historical fact of the hour. Victorian homes were wired with servant bell systems that ran on a network of taut wires and pulleys. A pull in one room would jingle a specific bell in the kitchen or the butler's pantry, summoning staff with precision. But these systems were prone to faults, mechanical failure, tension loss, or sometimes spontaneous ringing due to shifting in the walls. Or if you ask certain households, the movement of restless spirits. There are documented cases of families believing their deceased loved ones continued to use the bell system long after the rooms had been locked up. Your fringe fact. Some bell systems included coloured flags that popped out above the bells for clarity. Red for the drawing room, blue for the nursery, yellow for the master suite. You imagine Eleanor's was violet. Something quiet, refined and hauntingly permanent. There's a click behind you. You spin. It's the door to the servants' hallway. It's slightly open now. You'd passed it earlier, barely noticed it. It's narrow, painted the same colour as the walls, with a low handle designed to be discreet. And now it's open, just a crack, as if inviting you in, or daring you to. You hesitate. Then, against every ounce of common sense you still possess, you slip inside. The hallway is tight. The walls close. You walk sideways for a moment, brushing against plaster that's beginning to flake with age. The air is warmer here, oddly, and smells of soap and starch and, faintly, coal smoke. A long, narrow corridor unfolds in front of you, lit only by a single oil lamp at the far end. Doors branch off to your left and right, some marked in chalk, others unmarked. A few are slightly ajar. The floor beneath your feet is stone now, not wood, and it's damp. You don't want to think about why. As you pass each door, you glance in, small rooms, beds, some unmade, one still warm, a washstand with a cracked bowl, a trunk half open filled with clothing not yet laundered, a doll made from scraps of fabric sitting perfectly upright on a shelf. You're not sure where you're going until you reach the very end, where a door stands open and a faint light flickers inside. You step through and find yourself in a cramped sitting room. It's nothing like the ones upstairs. The walls are bare brick, the chairs are hard, but there's a table with a single candle, a pile of laundry, and something that makes your blood stop moving. A letter, sealed, with your name on it. You don't touch it right away. You stare. The envelope is thick, the edges slightly frayed. The handwriting is ornate, old-fashioned, looping, too much flourish for modern hands. You pick it up. It's cold, the wax seal is violet. Your fingers tremble as you break it. Inside, one sheet, folded carefully. A single line of writing. You should have left when the first bell rang. Your breath stops halfway through your chest and decides not to finish the trip. You read the sentence again, slowly, like the meaning that might change the second time around. It doesn't. The ink is dark, a little smudged at the tail end of the final word, as though the pen was lifted too suddenly, or the hand that wrote it trembled. You turn the letter over, nothing else, no name, no date, just that single chilling line. You should have left when the first bell rang. You fold it carefully, like it might explode if handled too roughly, and slide it back into the envelope with the kind of delicacy usually reserved for bomb disposal or handling someone else's crying baby. You set it back down on the table, though you can already feel it as somehow bonded to you. That letter now belongs to you in the same way the smell of old stone and candle wax now lives in your clothes, in your hair, under your skin. Behind you a floorboard creaks. You don't turn around. Not because you're brave, but because you know. Instinctively. If you look now, you'll see something you were never meant to. And once you see it, you'll never unsee it. You'll carry it back with you. Into the room, into your dreams, into the quiet moments when you forget, for a second, where you are. So you walk, out of the little servant sitting room, back into the narrow corridor. You walk fast, but not too fast. Running would be impolite. And this house notices everything. It keeps score. You emerge into the main hallway and gently close the disguised door behind you. The bell panel is still there, still dusty. The needle above Eleanor's room has finally stopped twitching. You reach out and brush your fingers across the label, as if touching her name might confirm she was ever real. All it confirms is that someone at some point decided she deserved a bell. You don't go back upstairs right away. Instead, you move into the front drawing room, empty now, except for the fire in the grate, burning low and slow, as if it too is conserving energy for the night ahead. You sit on the edge of the settee, posture perfect, because you're not capable of slouching anymore. The corset makes sure of that. Your spine is so straight it might snap. You're not alone in this room. You can feel it. Not in a horror movie way. No breath on your neck. No mirror reveal. Just that stillness. That very specific hush that only comes when a room is pretending not to listen. You glance toward the piano in the corner. The lid is up now. It wasn't before. One of the keys has been pressed. A single note. Waiting. You don't touch it. You've learned your lesson. This is not your house. You're just visiting. And overstaying your welcome. Now, for your historical reality check. Victorian homes weren't just homes. They were performances. Every room served a social function. Every object was placed with intention. Even the fireplace tools were symbolic. Polished brass tongs and pokers never used, just displayed to signal propriety and control. But beneath the surface, behind the curtains, under the rugs, everything was cracking. The soot in the chimneys, the rot in the floorboards, the secrets in the walls. Let's talk plumbing again, because just as you begin to settle into the illusion of peace, you hear it. The fireplace makes a sound, not crackling, not popping, a drip, then another. You lean forward. There, just under the edge of the hearth, a dark stain is slowly blooming on the stone. A thick, sluggish drop falls from somewhere behind the bricks and lands with a heavy pat. You move closer. Kneel. It's not water. You reach out, because of course you do, and touch the edge of the puddle. It's warm, sticky, smells faintly metallic. You stand up very quickly. Your stomach turns, not because of what it might be, but because you understand now. The plumbing in this house doesn't just move water. It moves everything. Messages, memories, things better left behind. And here's your fringe fact. Some large Victorian homes had what were essentially private sewer systems, with iron and lead pipes that snaked beneath the floors and walls, sometimes connecting multiple buildings, poorly built, often leaky and occasionally rooted in ways that would now violate several international health codes. These pipes weren't just conduits, they were extensions of the house's internal logic. Many historians now believe these systems contributed something to both physical illness and the psychological sense of rot that pervaded Victorian life. The decay wasn't just metaphor, it was plumbing. You leave the drawing room. Quietly, you pass the parlour, the morning room, the hall where the dead plant still hangs in its wicker cradle. You pass the umbrella stand where someone's gloves still sit, fingers curled slightly. You pass the grandfather clock that has not ticked all day, but now, of course, is ticking. Slowly, softly, upstairs again. Your room waits for you. The candle by the washstand is burned down to a stub. The basin has water in it now. It didn't before. You undress, finally. Strip down to your shift, your skin red and marked from the corset, your breath shallow. You move like someone recovering from injury, unsure if your body still belongs to you. You pull the blanket up, settle into bed and try to be still. The house groans, not angrily, just conversationally, like it's reminding you it's still here, that it knows you are too. And then, when your eyes are half closed, the fireplace exhales. Not smoke, not air, but sound. A soft, steady whisper. It's not in English. You don't need it to be. You understand exactly what it means. The pipes are carrying messages. From upstairs, from Eleanor, from wherever the bells go when they're done ringing. The whispering doesn't stop, it just shifts, like wind curling through a keyhole, changing pitch as it moves, never fully forming into anything you can name. You lie there in bed, covers drawn up to your chin like that might somehow shield you from plumbing-based possession, staring at the crackling hearth across the room. The flames are low but alive. The whispering is coming from behind them, not within the flames, behind them. From the wall or the flue, or the maze of iron and ceramic pipes buried in the bones of the house. You pull the blanket tighter and remind yourself this is all explainable. Just old vents and leaky pipes, just echoes of something long buried, just a completely normal Victorian experience. But the house disagrees, because suddenly the fire dies, just like that. No sputter, no slow flicker, just gone, snuffed. The coals still glow, dim and red, but the flame vanishes like someone took a wet rag to it. You're too cold to scream, too tired to run, so you sit there, and the silence returns. Not the kind of silence that makes space for rest, the kind that listens, the kind that waits for you to breathe so it can echo it back at you, slightly delayed, as if practicing. This house has stopped pretending. It doesn't want you here anymore. You swing your legs over the side of the bed and place your bare feet on the floor, wincing at the sudden chill. The rug is damp. You don't ask why. You rise, pick up your shawl and wrap it around your shoulders. You're not sure where you're going, but you've developed a theory that movement is safer than stillness. Stillness invites attention. Stillness makes you part of the furniture. You open the door and step into the hallway. Dark. Of course. All the lamps are out now, gas sconces snuffed. Not even a candle left burning. Only the grey-blue wash of moonlight from the hallway window, and the occasional glint from a brass door handle, catching just enough light to look like a lurking eye. You pause at the top of the stairs, and you hear it. Footsteps, not your own, not distant, above. They move slowly, across the ceiling, one measured step at a time, then a pause, then another. You glance up. That's the attic. You haven't been to the attic. You weren't invited. And yet here you are, standing directly under it, the steps above you moving with the unhurried confidence of something that's done this many times before. You could turn back. You could return to your bed and pretend this isn't happening. But you've crossed the line now, the one between guest and witness. So you climb. Back to the stairwell behind the linen cupboard, past the door that led to the haunted plumbing closet, up the creaking flight of servant steps. You don't bring a candle. You don't need to. The moonlight follows you now, curling through the house like it too wants answers. At the top of the narrow steps is a short landing. One more door. You open it. The attic breathes. It's not a rush of air. It's a subtle expansion, like something inhaling. The space is wide, unfinished, beams and rafters exposed, dust coating every surface like fine snow. Stacked trunks line the walls, some open, some tied shut with rope. Sheets drape over forgotten furniture, turning chairs into people and people into memories. A faint smell of lavender still lingers in the air, barely covering the musk of the mould and mothballs. And there, near the far wall, stands a full-length mirror. That's all, just the mirror. It's freestanding oval with an ornate carved frame, the kind you see in antique shops next to warnings about cursed objects. You walk toward it, feet silent against the boards. The mirror is fogged, not from breath, from the inside, and then it clears. Not all at once, just a smear like a finger dragging slowly down glass. Only there's no finger, and now you see it. Not yourself. Not quite. It's your outline, yes. But not your posture. Not your expression. Not the room behind you. The reflected space is cleaner. Lit. And you are smiling. Not a kind smile. The kind you make when you're about to say something cutting. The smile fades. And now the reflection just watches you. Still. Too still. And you begin to hear it again. The whispering. Not from behind you, from the mirror. You lean in carefully. And the whisper becomes a voice, just one, female, soft, saying your name, and you step back, and your reflection does not. Your mind scrambles to find logic. It fails. Every rational thread you've been clinging to all day snaps like an overused corset string. You don't scream, and that would be far too modern. Instead, do you do what any good Victorian would do? You curtsy and back away, out of the attic, down the steps, through the narrow hallway, into the bedroom, and close the door. And that's when you hear it again. The plumbing. Bubbling this time, pulsing. You rush to the washbasin, which now holds not water, but something thick. It's dark, almost black, smells like iron and damp earth. And it's rising, slowly. You don't touch it, you back away, and the gaslight flares, bright and sudden, and dies again. The mirror in the corner, one you hadn't noticed before, is cracked. Your reflection is not. Welcome to the final stage of the Victorian house experience. The betrayal of objects. Here's your historical fact. Victorians believed mirrors could trap souls. After someone died, families often covered mirrors with black crepe so the spirit wouldn't get caught, or worse, remain. They also opened windows immediately to let the soul escape, because if you didn't, well, the house would keep it. There's scholarly debate, of course. Some claim these were symbolic rituals, ways to give death a structure. Others argue these customs were practiced quite literally. Mirrors were seen as thresholds. Windows, too. The Victorians weren't just afraid of death. They were afraid of what it might leave behind. You stand in the centre of the room, heart racing. The pipes gurgle. The fire sputters. The floor creaks. And from the attic above you hear something moving again. Dragging, slow, toward the stairs. You don't move. Can't, really. You're standing in the middle of the room with your bare feet planted on a rug that now feels like it's pulling slightly upward, like the fabric itself is reacting to what's approaching. The dragging sound from the attic is getting closer. You know exactly what it is. Not because you've seen it, but because at this point, the house has spent the last 18 hours teaching you a very clear lesson. It doesn't need you to understand, only to obey, and you haven't. You turn slowly toward the door, half expecting it to be open already, or worse, gone. But it's there, slightly ajar. You didn't leave it like that. Of course not. The air through the crack is cooler now, and behind it, silence. But not calm silence. The kind you get before a storm, or a scream. You approach it, fingers trembling. You nudge the door open a few inches more, peer into the hallway, and find darkness. Complete, not just unlit. Refusing light. The gas sconces are extinguished again, and the moonlight is gone. No fog-shrouded window glow this time, just pitch, like someone hung a velvet curtain across the world and forgot to lift it. Then the bell rings, loud, sharp. The needle on the wall panel jerks so hard you can hear the metal ping as it strikes the wood. You can't see it, but you know it's Eleanor's room again. It's always Eleanor. And this time more bells join in. One by one, ding, drawing room. Ding, servants' hall, ding ding ding, nursery. A cascade of sound echoes through the walls like a panicked symphony, each room crying out for attention, for release, for vengeance maybe. It's hard to tell because now the bells are overlapping, chiming together in uneven intervals, like they're competing to be heard. The wires behind the walls are twitching like nerves, the entire house is ringing, and you're the only one left to answer. The noise drives you backward into the room until your spine bumps the cold washstand. You grip the edge of it to ground yourself, but your hand brushes something wet. You glance down. The basin has overflowed. The black liquid is still rising, silently, thick as oil and gleaming into the gaslight. It's reached the edge of the stand now, dripping down the legs, inching toward the floor. You step away fast, retreating toward the bed, but the fire flares again in the hearth behind you, blinding and blue. Not orange, not warm, blue, like gas, like chemical burn, like something lit from the inside, and then the bells stop. All of them, dead silence. You'd think that would help. It does not, because in that silence you hear a footstep on the landing. Just one, then another. Coming down, the attic stairs, measured, heavy. You rush toward the hallway and fling open the door just in time to see a figure rounding the corner at the far end of the corridor. A silhouette, female, tall, hair pinned high in a shape you recognize from every portrait in this house. Skirt trailing behind her like a shadow made of lace. She doesn't run, she glides straight toward you, and you do what you've been fighting all day. You run, bare feet slapping against cold wood. You bolt past your door, past the mirror in the hallway that now shows only her reflection, not yours, and down the staircase so fast you nearly trip at every step. The banister groans beneath your touch. The carpet is gone. Where did the carpet go? You hit the landing hard and veer toward the drawing room. It's open now. The candle's lit. The piano playing itself, soft notes, slow, a lullaby. You don't enter, you don't stop. You turn and head for the front hall. The bellboard is still vibrating. The front door is unlocked. You pull it open. And behind it, brick. Something has bricked up the front entrance. Seamless, perfect, fresh mortar still damp. The iron handle of the door scrapes across stone when you try to close it again, and you realise you are sealed in. The windows. You check the nearest. Painted over. From the inside, thick strokes of black, like someone used tar and rage to erase the outside world. And now for your historical reality check. Some Victorian homes were literally sealed shut during mourning periods. Curtains drawn, mirrors covered, doors locked, visitors turned away. The house became a tomb for weeks, sometimes months. Some households even nailed windows closed to preserve the air of grief. It was considered noble and deeply unsettling. Your fringe fact, in more extreme cases, mourning houses employed silent hours, during which no one was allowed to speak, move furniture, or even walk across certain floors. Servants wore felt shoes, clocks were muffled, everything was done in total reverent silence. The idea was to trap grief in the house like a spirit, let it hover and feed until it chose to leave. You race to the back of the house. The kitchen door, gone, not locked, gone, replaced by solid plaster painted to match the walls. You pound your fists against it, but it thuds dully, and then the lights go out again. All of them, except one, the bellboard. Still glowing, one needle, still twitching. You approach it slowly, now too tired to panic, and there, written beneath the final bell, the one that wasn't labelled before. Your name, the needle is pointed there now, and above it the bell is gently ringing. Just once, then again, you step back, your name on the wall in the house. You are no longer a guest, you are no longer a visitor. You are part of the system now. A room, a bell, a servant, a memory. The plumbing clicks behind the wall like applause, and the piano starts again. But this time it's playing your lullaby. One you've never heard before, but somehow already know. You don't move, you don't blink, you just stand there, barefoot in the front hall, watching your name deliver on a tarnished brass plate while a bell rings above it like a soft, methodical death knell. You'd like to believe it's all a hallucination. A sleep-deprived, corset-compressed, suet-poisoned fever dream, but the floor is still cold beneath your feet. The wallpaper still smells like old tea leaves and mothballs, and the piano is still playing that tune. Soft, lilting, maddening. It isn't playing itself anymore. Someone is playing it. Slowly. A note at a time, and it's getting closer. You step backward until your shoulder hits the grandfather clock. Tick, tick, tick. That's new. It hasn't ticked all day, but now it's come alive again, just in time to mock you with every second you've overstayed your welcome. You glance at the bellboard again. The bell with your name swings once more, harder this time, and then stops, mid-air, frozen. Like the system has acknowledged you, claimed you, labelled you for processing. It's over. No one ever survives past the naming. But still, like a stubborn little modern creature who doesn't understand boundaries, you run. You take off down the corridor, past the closed doors and the mirrors that reflect things you don't want to see. Your own back, hands that aren't yours, rooms that no longer exist. You round a corner and catch a blur of movement ahead. Lace, pale silk, a figure disappearing into the shadows, as familiar now as your own reflection. You don't follow, you just turn again. Another hallway, another door. You're hoping to find some place the house hasn't rewritten yet, some crack in the foundation where reason still lives. Instead, you find the nursery. You stop, because the door is open. It shouldn't be. It was locked this morning, you're sure of it. Someone made a vague comment at breakfast about keeping the little room quiet. You didn't ask questions, you're asking now. The nursery is bathed in grey light from a window that doesn't belong there. The curtains are tied back with black ribbon. The wallpaper is faded with a repeating pattern of small birds, swallows maybe, flying in neat lines. There's a rocking horse in the corner, it rocks, very slowly. No wind, no motion, just rocking. You don't want to look at it, but you do, and you see the scratches on the floor beneath it. Long, deep, like something tried to leave the room, dragging the horse with it. You step inside, the cradle is empty, but not undisturbed. The pillow inside is dented, and the small blanket is folded in a triangle at the foot, the way a nurse might leave it after preparing for a child who's no longer coming back. There are no toys, only a few objects placed precisely around the room. A porcelain doll on the windowsill, her eyes not closed in sleep mode. A set of children's books with all the pages glued shut. And on the mantel, above a fireplace so shallow it's basically decorative, a single photograph in a tarnished frame. You walk toward it, breath hitching. It's Eleanor. You know it without knowing how. She's younger in the photograph. Standing beside the cradle, hands folded in front of her, expression unreadable. But it's her, the same eyes, the same jawline as the portrait in the parlour. But this Eleanor is different. Empty. Like she's already on her way out of the world. Like she's just waiting for the house to catch up and take her the rest of their way. And now for your historical fact. Victorian nurseries weren't for joy. They were holding areas. For children. For grief. For status. A healthy child was a mark of divine favour. A sick one? Well, best not to bring that up in polite company. That's why nurseries were often physically distant from the main living quarters. Tucked in upper corners, kept out of earshot. Out of sight. Out of mind, until they weren't. Your fringe fact? Some Victorian mothers wrote entire mourning diaries after losing a child, devotional books filled with poetry, pressed flowers, even snippets of hair, not for therapy, for social standing. A properly grieved child was as important as a properly dressed dinner guest. You leave the photo where it is. You back out of the nursery slowly, not daring to look at the cradle again, or the rocking horse which has finally stopped. In the hallway the air feels different. Not heavier, anticipatory. The house knows you've seen it now, that you've put the final piece in place, that Eleanor's not just a sad name on a bell. She was the girl in the nursery, the woman in the portrait, the figure at the end of the hallway. And maybe, just maybe, she never left. You hear the piano again, louder now, you follow the sound, and down another hallway, the one you swore wasn't there this morning. Past walls that now lean in slightly, a new arrangement of portraits. You glance at them quickly, recognising none of the faces. Except, there, at the very end, your own. You freeze. It's a painting, oil on canvas. Not exact, but close enough. You in that ridiculous corseted dress. You with your hair up, your mouth caught mid-smile, but the eyes, your eyes, looking just past the viewer, like you're watching something approach from behind. You back away. The piano stops. Dead silence again. And then the bells ring. All of them, at once. Not in harmony, in chaos. You run, because there's nothing else to do. But this time you don't run toward the rooms you know. You run toward the back, toward the narrow stairwell leading to the cellar, the one they told you was off limits. And as you descend into the darkness, the bells grow louder. The plumbing begins to scream, and behind you in the walls, the house breathes in. You've descended into the belly of the beast now, down the servant stairs, past the boundary of polite living, into the part of the house that was never meant to be seen, not by guests, not by daylight. The steps here are uneven stones, slick in places with the condensation that clings to your bare feet like unwelcome hands. The air thickens as you move lower, dense with the scent of damp coal dust, rusted iron, and that peculiar sweetness that comes from something organic left too long in a sealed jar. You grip the wall for balance and realise the plaster has sloughed away down here. It's just brick now. Cold, wet brick. At the bottom, a door, of course. You push it open and enter the cellar. It's not like any modern basement. There are no folding chairs, no forgotten exercise equipment, no boxes of off-season decorations. No, this is something older. Primitive. The kind of place you imagine when someone in a ghost story says, "Don't go down there." The floor is uneven dirt. The ceiling low and vaulted. Wooden beams curve overhead, blackened by smoke or fire, or maybe just the passage of too many years. There's a root cellar to your left, a coal scuttle to your right, and ahead of you, lining the wall in symmetrical rows, are the pipes. You stop. Because this is it. The system. You've heard it. You've followed it. Now you're standing in front of it. The pipes aren't just plumbing, not really. They're too numerous, too deliberate, snaking through the walls like arteries, branching off at precise intervals. There's a pulsing sound coming from them. Not water, not air. Thudding rhythm. Slow, heavy, like a heartbeat. A mechanical, impossible heartbeat. You approach slowly, candle held high, and the light flickers over their surface. Some are iron, thick and rusted. Others are ceramic. One is glass. You can see something moving inside the glass pipe. It's dark, slow, not quite liquid. It coils and recedes, like it knows you're watching. You reach out, because you're a fool now, fully committed to whatever role the house has written for you, and place your hand gently on the pipe. It's warm. It pulses beneath your palm. And from somewhere above, a bell rings again. Only one. Yours. Your historical fact for this moment of poor life choices. Some Victorian homes used extensive internal piping not just for plumbing, but also for communication. Speaking tubes, gas delivery, even dumbwaiter systems. The wealthier the house, the more elaborate the veins. But in older houses, these systems often became labyrinths, with little documentation, leaving later owners with architectural mysteries. Pipes that seemed to go nowhere. Tubes that carried echoes. One wall would whisper, another would bleed. Your quirky fringe fact? There's a theory, quietly passed around by those who study haunted architecture, that some Victorian homes weren't just haunted by people, but by the houses themselves. Sentient houses, they called them. Not alive, but aware. Memory-keeping machines built of wood and dust and social repression. The plumbing was just how they spoke. Behind you, something shifts. You spin. But there's no one there. The shadows have thickened, though, grown bolder. They lean in from the corners, clustering like dust before a storm. The candle flickers again, now a small, panicked flame. You hold it higher and turn toward the far side of the cellar, drawn there by a draught, a cold breath through stone that feels too purposeful to be weather. There's another door. This one is smaller, iron, bolted shut. You reach out and lift the bolt. It groans. The door opens inward, and you find the cistern. It's a massive stone basin, built into the foundation, once used for collecting rainwater and runoff. The water is still, black. The surface mirrors nothing. No light, no reflection, just void. You step forward slowly, candle in one hand, eyes on the water. There's something floating there. No, submerged just beneath the surface. A shape, pale, long. You kneel. Bring the candle closer. It's a hand, delicate. Female, reaching up. You drop the candle. Everything goes black. You don't scream, you listen. Because now you hear it, rising from the pipes, from the floors above, from the water below, a voice, soft, broken. She drowned in the house. You're not sure if it's Eleanor's voice or your own. You're not even sure it's in your ears. It's in the walls, the bones, the bell system, the heartbeat of copper and iron that connects every room. She drowned in the house, it repeats. She never left. You scramble backward, but there's nowhere to go. The pipes surround you. The darkness thickens, pressing against your skin, and in the reflection of the cistern water, just before your candle sputters its last, you see her. Eleanor, standing behind you, eyes hollow, dress soaked, mouth closed in a straight, unbroke line, and on her chest, sewn into the fabric of her bodice, your name. The whispering starts again, not just from her, from everything. The walls, the plumbing, the floors, the mirror in your bedroom, the bellboard, all whispering in unison now. You were expected. You lurch to your feet and run. No direction, just movement, back through the cellar, into the hall, up the stairs, past rooms that are no longer what they were. The drawing room is now just furniture stacked to the ceiling. The dining room holds only mirrors, hundreds of them. The nursery door is sealed shut with wax, and the bells are ringing again. All of them. But they're not just summoning, they're counting down. You feel it. Each chime a number. Each chime a step closer to being claimed. You make it to your room. The mirror's covered now by lace black pleats. You didn't put it there. On the bed lies your dress, the one from dinner, folded neatly, and on top of it, a bell, just like the others, just like Eleanor's, and it's already engraved. With your name, you stare at the bell. It rests in the centre of your neatly folded dinner dress, like a wedding gift no one asked for. The engraved plate gleams faintly in the lamplight, even though no lamp is lit. The room provides its own glow now, a soft, wrong kind of illumination, like light filtered through milk or memory. You take a step back. The bell doesn't move. It doesn't need to. The message is clear. You are part of the system now. Assigned, installed, official. You are no longer merely alive in the house, you are logged. You don't pick it up, but you can feel it. Every detail. Heavy, cold, balanced too perfectly to be a normal object. The kind of object that doesn't roll when pushed. That always lands upright. You know if you touch it, something else will start. Something final. You look around the room. It is yours now. Not in a cosy, welcome to your Airbnb kind of way. Yours in the same way that coffins belong to corpses. You move to the door. Try it. It opens, of course. The house wants you to wander. It always has. It's how it finds new places to fill. You step into the hallway. It's different now, longer, tilted slightly. The wallpaper patterns are inverted. The portraits have turned to face the wall. Gaslights flicker like they're being breathed on. The hallway floor feels uneven beneath your feet, almost soft, like walking on earth instead of boards. And then you see it. The other bellboards. You didn't know there were more. Not just the one in the front hall, these stretch all the way down the corridor. Each section a new row, each bell neatly labelled. Some of the names are familiar. Eleanor, Edith, Lady M. Others are just titles: the governess, the cook, the second son, the visitor, the boy in the blue room, the new arrival. That last one's bell is ringing. You already know it's for you. You walk faster. Rooms pass like dream fragments. Some open, showing scenes you don't want to understand. One contains a party frozen in time. A dozen people in gowns and tails standing perfectly still, faces turned toward a wall. Another room holds nothing but birds. Dead. Perched perfect, each with a tiny bell around its neck. No sound. Just waiting. You don't stop. You don't look directly at anything. The house notices when you notice it. You keep moving until you reach the nursery door. It's unsealed. The wax is gone. Inside, the cradle is missing. The rocking horse lies on its side, and the mirror above the fireplace is cracked. You step in. The air is warm here, almost humid. You kneel in front of the mirror. Your reflection is delayed. You lift your hand, and 2 seconds later it lifts in the glass. You smile. It does not. It just stares. Tired. Pale. Filthy. Exactly as you are. But not playing along anymore. And then the reflection mouths your name, but doesn't move its lips. Just the name. In your voice. You rise and back out again. This isn't rescue. This is ritual. And you know now. The house has done this before so many times. Each visitor, each guest, each invited soul who overstayed, who found the bells, the letters, the water, the walls. It waits, it performs, it consumes, it remembers. That's why the system works so well. It isn't chaos, it's architecture. Here's your historical fact. Victorian homes were obsessed with legacy. Every room told a story, every story was curated. Family portraits weren't just decoration, they were lineages, promises, hauntings in oil, or rooms were left untouched after someone died. Objects never moved. The home became the mausoleum, the timeline, the judge. Your fringe fact? In some households, the dead were never removed. Not immediately. They were laid out in the parlour, dressed, watched, sometimes for days, and when finally buried, their clothing and belongings were kept, reused, repurposed. The past didn't pass, it just settled. You reach the main staircase. The front door is gone again, replaced by the original wall, seamless, solid, but the stairs. They've changed. Now there are 3 flights, one down, one up, one sideways. You choose the middle, always safest to go up in ghost stories. They rarely expect that. You climb slowly, each step creaking like a throat trying not to cough. At the top, a hallway you've never seen, narrow, almost horizontal. Your shoulders graze the walls. This is servant space, oh? The passages behind the show, the arteries of the house, you follow it to a single door, it bears your name now. Not a plaque. Etched into the wood. You don't open it, you just lean your forehead against it and exhale. And the door opens on its own. Inside, a small room, bare. A bed, a table, a washstand. The same layout as Eleanor's room. You step in, the walls are white, the mirror's blank, the bell is already mounted. Above the bed, you sit, you're tired, so tired. You think of the letter, the one you found in the basement. You should have left when the first bell rang. Yes, you should have. You lie down on the bed, not pulling the cover over you, just resting on top of it, palms flat on either side, eyes on the ceiling. You blink once, twice, and then... You hear the bell ring. Not yours, the next one. A new name, a new arrival. And you smile, because now you understand, this house doesn't trap people, it trains them. You close your eyes as the plumbing shifts above, below, around. You're not afraid anymore. You have a room now, a bell, a name, a purpose, and someone new has just rung for help. And now the house is quiet. Not because it's empty, but because it's full. Full of echoes, full of footsteps, full of names whispered through walls and bells still twitching on dusty panels. The fire in the drawing room glows low, casting flickering shadows on portraits that no longer hang straight. Somewhere above, the attic floor creaks, then creaks again, as it always does when someone forgets they're not alone up there. A new guest has arrived. Their shoes are too clean, their posture too modern, and they ask questions the house doesn't care to answer, yet, but it will. Because it always does. The walls will bend, the staircases will extend, the wallpaper will shift just enough to be noticed and then denied. The bells will ring, not all at once, not yet, just one at a time. Like a gentle knock, a polite request, a warning that sounds too much like an invitation. You're still here in a way. In the plumbing, in the bell wires, in the way the gaslights flare whenever someone lies. The house doesn't forget its residents. It simply absorbs them, wears them like layers, like wallpaper, like polite little names on polished brass. Sleep now, not because it's safe, but because the house is resting too. Gathering strength, preparing for the next round of the next story, the next poor soul who finds a dusty envelope addressed to them in a place they've never been, written in a hand that shouldn't know their name. Somewhere in the dark, the mirror clears, and a new reflection starts to smile.